Chapter 29:38. At this moment in Wan Yuan Temple, regardless of whether it was winter or drought, flowers would bloom and cranes would land on the ground. All living things with spirituality would instinctively get close to Ning Qin. The floating prayer beads were wrapped around his wrist, and the golden tassel fell beside his leg. His fingertips were pale and pure like snow. Suddenly, the golden tassel was tugged by someone. Ning Qin opened his thin lips slightly and was explaining the sutra. His tone suddenly paused, and when no one noticed anything strange, he continued the explanation just now. The young man's voice was pleasant and cold. When it entered the ears, it washed away the distracting thoughts in the mind. The little person grabbed his tassel and climbed up. She even kicked his leg. This made Ning Chen's eyelashes tremble slightly, but he still did not lower his head and maintained his calm appearance. Wei Bai, who had once again spent a lot of money, bought the damn transformation sticker again, wanting to gain the monk's favorability. Otherwise, she would have to stay in the spiritual pool every day. Even if she waited until the lotus flowers withered, she might not gain the monk's favorability. Bai Weiwei grabbed the tassel and hugged a floating Buddhist prayer bead. Like a swing, she shook it, then with a tug, she let go. She instantly fell into Ning Chen's arms. The young man, who was still explaining calmly, finally looked to the side and saw Weiwei Bai falling towards him while covering her face. She shouted, "Monk, I'm going to fall to my death. You have to catch me." Under the lotus platform was a very high flight of stairs. If she fell, even if her body was light, she would still be injured. The young man, who was originally holy and cold, finally showed a trace of helplessness on his face. He sighed faintly, stretched out his beautiful fingertips, and spread them out. The little person fell right into his palm. The sudden touch was soft. Her lotus dress was also very pink, giving people the feeling that she was a glutinous rice bowl. This sudden turn of events interrupted the rhythm of the explanation. The young man pursed his thin red lips and lowered his eyes. His eyes reflected her body that was rolling on his fingers. She sat up with difficulty and immediately showed him a cute smile. She even winked at him. "Monk, I miss you, so I came to find you." Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while before he casually placed her on his knees. Then, he looked up again. He looked at all the monks who were dumbfounded. His voice was still calm. "Continue." The old monk at the side immediately lowered his head and obediently knocked on the wooden fish. Weiwei Bai sat in his palm curiously, looking left and right. "Monk, it's fine if you're not interesting, but you've even nurtured a bunch of even more boring monks. Can't you do something fun?" Ning Chen ignored her. It was as if there was nothing more important to him than explaining the scriptures. Weiwei Bai snorted coldly. She suddenly raised her hand and blew on her sharp fingernails. Then, he scratched his palm. Ning Chen's expression was calm. Weiwei Bai coldly snorted and scratched her fingertips. His skin was really thick. He couldn't even scratch it. She frowned and lowered her head. Her 10 fingernails lit up, and then she scratched quickly as if she was digging the ground. Finally, Ning Chen's eyes trembled slightly, and his fingertips trembled. His voice explaining the scriptures also lowered. "Weiwei Bai, scratch scratch scratch. You stingy bald donkey." Under the warning of the sound of the wooden fish, everyone lowered their heads again and began to listen to the scriptures carefully. In the end, they couldn't hear it. Because the young man on the stage didn't speak. They looked up again, only to see the young man on the lotus platform squinting his eyes and quietly looking at his palm. // Chapter 29:39. This was the first time they saw such a serious expression on their abbot's face. It seemed like he had encountered some unsolvable problem. Ning Chen was silent for a while before he turned his head and said in a low voice, "Do your homework for the rest." Then he closed his fingers gently. His beautiful fingertips were like a wall, preventing the person inside from falling out. Then he turned and left. Once he was out of everyone's sight, he said softly, "Nonsense. You're just a demon. How can you go to this kind of Dharma assembly? There are plenty of demon slayers among the Buddhist cultivators who are participating in this Dharma assembly. A weak little demon like you can be crushed to death with one finger." Wei Wei Bai sat up straight and hummed delicately, "I miss you." Ning Chen stopped in his tracks. He felt like they were communicating from different worlds. Why is she so disobedient? Back in the meditation room, Ning Chen put her on the table and took out a bead from the prayer beads. Don't force yourself to transform into a human form. It's too damaging to your foundation. Besides, you've been on land for a long time and lack of water will cause your cultivation to regress. After saying that, the prayer bead on his pale fingertips fell into her arms. She hugged the prayer bead and was stunned. Then she looked up, "Is this for me?" "Monk." Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while before nodding indifferently, "I wanted to give it to you before, but you were too noisy. So I gave it to you today." He wanted her to be a lotus for a while longer. That way, his ears would be quieter. What he didn't expect was that she forced herself to transform into a human to find him. Wei Wei Bai hugged the large prayer bead. Suddenly, tears fell from her beautiful eyes. "Monk, you're really a good person. This is your life bead. You're giving it to me, aren't you?" Ning Chen didn't want her to be too grateful. He didn't care about this. However, he heard the little lotus fairy say, "Do you like me?" The young man lowered his eyelashes and looked at her quietly for a while. Suddenly, he reached out and wanted to take the prayer bead from her arms. "Forget it, just give it back to me." Bai Weiwei immediately hugged the prayer beads and opened her mouth to bite his finger. It was a small bite mark. It didn't hurt at all. It only itched. His fingertips paused. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai snort coldly, "Monk, if you give it to me, it's mine. How can you snatch it back? You're shameless." Ning Chen's eyes were calm. After a while, he took back his finger as if nothing had happened and didn't say anything. Then he turned around to get the teacups and began to pour the tea. When no one was paying attention, his fingertips lightly touched the difference, but they froze. Then, Wei Wei Bai heard the favorability notification sound. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. Wei Wei Bai, bah, he's so stingy that he doesn't look like a man. Wei Wei Bai studied the Buddha beads and realized that the Buddha beads were filled with flowing energy. She took a deep breath and the energy instantly surged into her body. Before she could react, she had already fallen from the table onto the floor. When Ning Chen heard the commotion, he immediately turned his head. His gaze landed on the ground, but he suddenly froze. Wei Wei Bai touched her waist and looked up. Her bright red lips were slightly pursed. She tilted her head and said unhappily, "Monk, what are you looking at?" "My waist hurts." The young girl sat on the ground. Her pink dress hung down messily, revealing her white jade feet that were slender and delicate. Her long hair fell to the ground, as smooth as ink silk. Her eyes were like the mist of a spirit pool, hazy yet clear. There was a contradictory beauty that could turn all living things upside down. She had once become bigger, but it was shrouded in darkness and her figure was illusory, so he couldn't see it clearly. However, he never thought that he would suddenly see her in her physical form, or even her mature form. She was a beautiful demon that could bring chaos to the world. Ning Chen held the teacup in his hand. He suddenly turned around and said to her, "You've absorbed too much energy. You need to go to the spirit pool to digest and cleanse it. Take the Buddha beads with you." If you don't have enough energy, you can absorb it. Wei Wei Bai jumped up. Only then did she realize that she had grown up. She immediately smiled. Monk, I've grown up. Ning Chen's tone was calm, and she immediately picked up the Buddha beads. Then, she happily turned around and ran away. This thing is very useful. Thank you, monk. Ning Chen expressionlessly turned around. When he saw Wei Wei Bai at the door, she suddenly turned around and pointed at her bright red lips. Right, monk, am I beautiful when I've grown up? Ning Chen, Wei Wei Bai laughed happily and then left. Ning Chen stood in place. His eyes were still indifferent. Then, he slowly raised the teacup in his hand and took a sip. The tea was cold. As for him, his chest began to heat up. Was this a desire? After he finished drinking the tea, he slowly let out a sigh of relief. Then, he softly muttered to himself, what a big trouble. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 20. The read the at https://www.sashu.com/the read the at https://www.sashu.com/ read the at https://www.sashu.com the and read the at https://m sashu. Com save button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 2940. Wei Wei Bai was squatting on a lotus leaf, holding a black prayer bead in her hand, thinking about how to eat it. The system said that if this thing could be completely digested, then she would be able to maintain her human form for a long time, and would not shrink. But the prerequisite was that she could completely digest it. If she couldn't digest it and stuff it in, it would, bang, explode. Wei Wei Bai hesitated, but still felt that it would be too ugly to explode. So she put the prayer bead in her sleeve. This lotus dress could change size according to her body shape, and even the sleeves had pockets to store things. Sure enough, being a fairy had its benefits. At least it could save on clothes. Because clothes could change size by themselves, and they could also clean themselves. Wei Wei Bai held her face with both hands. I need to find a mirror. The system, the strategy wasn't important, the mirror was. Then it reminded her, you're a fairy, a big fairy. Staying in the spirit pool is still within the male lead's range, so no one dared to come over, so no one noticed you. Now there are a lot of demon slayers outside, so you'll probably be killed if you run out. Actually, the host wasn't a fairy. She was still a normal lotus. Her human nature was also because of the sticker. But the sticker couldn't fight against the heavenly axiom, it could only last a little bit each time, and it couldn't let the host grow. But the male lead's prayer beads could. The prayer bead's power was used on the sticker. The sticker had an endless supply of power. It allowed it to produce a huge amount of power to fight against the heavenly axiom, turning the host's normal plant body into a human form. But as a fairy without a fairy's aura, she had the purification ability of the lotus. Other than drinking more water than humans, she had no other specialty. Right, was narcissism considered a specialty? If it was, then the host was still invincible. Wei Wei Bai sat on the lotus leaf, silent, as if she was thinking hard about something. The system waited silently. It was probably some sort of strategy that was about to be created. Finally, Wei Wei Bai's expression softened. Okay, I'll go find the monk and ask him to buy me a mirror. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin again. No, this won't do. The monk doesn't look like a good person who would buy a mirror for others. His favorability is too low. I'd better increase his favorability first. System, we've finally gotten back to the walkthrough. It really wasn't easy. Wei Wei Bai stepped on the surface of the water. Her body was still as light as a feather. Even if she transformed into her human form, it was only the weight of the lotus. He could walk on water. It was already dark. Several oil lamps were lit in the meditation room. It was a little dim. However, Ning Chen was not bothered at all. Instead, he lowered his head and flipped through the scriptures. Her fair fingertips landed on the scripture, glistening like jade. His features were handsome and his expression was calm. Suddenly, he realized something and heard a sweet laughter. His eyes turned cold as he slowly raised his head. He saw a beautiful pink dress hanging down from the crossbeam. A pair of slender and exquisite feet were faintly discernible under the dress. Above that was the beautiful white color of her calves. He paused slightly, but did not say anything. He continued to flip through the scriptures. The woman asked, "Monk, am I beautiful?" Ning Chen was indifferent. The woman suddenly poked her head out from the beam. Her exquisite and beautiful face could charm almost everyone in the world. It was Wei Wei Bai. Why are you looking at this broken thing again? Don't you want to look at me again? Ning Chen finally sighed. That was why he said it was troublesome. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. 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 Chapter 2941. He had too much darkness on him and it condensed into a hell that circulated in his Buddhist heart. Even if the little lotus fairy could purify it, she couldn't purify a hell. She could only make him feel better and even clearer so that he could continue to suppress this dark hell. But hell was more like a demon that had its own thoughts and consciousness. It was smart and cunning, cruel and twisted. His Buddhist heart was stirred up by the little demon and a crack appeared. And this crack was known by the dark hell. In the future, it would no longer be a mountain of bones. But, temptation. It turned into her appearance to continue to tempt him. Ning Chen stretched out his hand expressionlessly and a faint Buddhist light appeared on his fingertips. The woman formed by the dark aura had already sat on the table and was lying on the scriptures, looking at him seductively. Monk, aren't you going to touch me? I'm so soft. Ning Chen stretched out his hand and gently tapped the middle of her forehead. You should stop. Sooner or later, I will have a way to completely purify you. The dark aura that turned into Wei Wei Bai suddenly had a ferocious expression and its body shattered little by little. Old stubborn man, just you wait. Your Buddhist heart has been stirred and your desire has been born. You think you can destroy us? Dream on. I'll wait to completely pull you into hell and let you suffer a fate worse than death. I'll let you completely fall and become a demon, spurned by thousands of people in the world. At that time, you will be as filthy as us, beyond redemption, as soon as he finished speaking. The dark aura that turned into a human figure dissipated in the Buddhist light just like that. Ning Chen withdrew his finger as if nothing had happened and then continued to read. Just as he was about to flip through the pages, he heard a delicate voice. Monk, you're actually reading scriptures. It's too boring. Ning Chen's fingertips paused and the Buddhist light faintly appeared again. The illusion came again, suddenly, a pair of hands pressed down on his scriptures. Monk, are you in a daze? Why aren't you replying? Ning Chen looked up and saw the girl looking at him expressionlessly. She was frowning as if she was dissatisfied with his neglect. Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while. He finally relaxed a little and retracted the Buddhist light on his finger. Then, he said slowly, since I have nothing to do, I'll just review it. It's not boring. Wei Wei Bai was too lazy to blindly decipher these antique scriptures with him. She immediately grabbed the table, lightly jumped up, and sat on his scripture. "Monk, I want to buy something from you." Ning Chen's expression was still indifferent, but his eyes fell on the scripture under her skirt. After a moment of silence, he said, "What is it?" Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin and giggled, "Buy me a mirror. I'm so big now, I must be very beautiful. But there are no mirrors in the temple, I can't even see my own face." Ning Chen's tone was flat. "Your appearance is just..." Before he could finish his words, his face was pulled. The young girl's slender fingers pinched his cheeks. "Say it. Say it again. My appearance is illusory. You're just jealous of my beauty. You're about to go bald, ugly and gossipy, and you still have the nerve to talk about my appearance. Are you worthy?" Ning Chen, bald donkey, was a little unpleasant to hear. For a moment, he couldn't react. Then he remembered that he had forgotten to cut his hair. His hair had grown to the back of his neck. Because there were too many miscellaneous matters, plus the destruction of the Linglong banquet and the death of the Linglong sect's leader. Buddhism was now under great pressure. Demons and devils were now attacking the disciples of Buddhism. // save button. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2942. Some of the Taoist regulars at the exquisite banquet were also dissatisfied with his methods of destruction. Unlike Buddhists, Taoists were more freewheeling. Therefore, they were willing to exchange for many things at the exquisite banquet. They didn't care if these things came from clean sources. Therefore, these days, they sent people every day to reprimand him for his ruthlessness towards the exquisite banquet. These things weren't a big deal, but they were messy. For a moment, he didn't think of cutting his hair again. Ning Chen reached out indifferently and held her fingers. The girl's soft fingertips were too fragile. His strength froze for a moment, then he returned to normal and put her fingers down. Mirrors are what evil creatures like to attach themselves to. Recently, demons have been running rampant. You're a new demon spirit, and one that was nurtured by a Buddhist spiritual pond. You're not on the same path as them. You don't have to harm others. You can continue to purify yourself and cultivate with me. His voice was faint and clear. As if he could clean her ears. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but reach out and pick her ears. Her brain was numb. No matter what he said, she couldn't help but agree. Was this the king of transmigration marketing? With this voice, it was no wonder that the bald monk could sit there for so long just to listen to her explain the scriptures. After all, this voice and this rhythm of speech were not boring at all. Then Wei Wei Bai said, "I want a mirror." Ning Chen's temper was still very good. "There is no mirror. Mirrors are not good things." Wei Wei Bai, "Then how can I see my own face?" Ning Chen, "What's there to see? Everyone has a face. There is no need to be curious." Wei Wei Bai, then she silently turned around and turned her back to him. She looked like she was annoyed by him not talking to her. Ning Chen was speechless and then silently pondered. Why, was she angry again? Did he say anything that made her angry just now? It was the truth. There was nothing inappropriate or rude about it. Then why was she like this? Ning Chen felt that he could never understand what a demon was thinking. Although she was a good demon. But his brain didn't seem to be working well. Thinking of this, Ning Chen didn't dwell on it any longer. Instead, he reached out his fingertips and gently pinched the scripture on the table. He planned to pull the scripture out from under his clothes and continue studying it. However, he found that her body was as light as a feather, and she was sitting down hard. This made it impossible for him to pull. If he insisted on pulling, the scripture would shatter. Ning Chen looked down silently for a while. When she finally looked up, the Buddhist prayer beads suddenly flew over and bound Wei by. The Buddha beads floated up and pulled the enlarged little lotus flower spirit up. Her whole body floated for a moment, and there was some space between her and the table. Ning Chen unhurriedly took out the scripture. The prayer beads immediately loosened and flew away. With a bang, she sat back on the clean table with a dumbfounded look on her face. Ning Chen calmly spread out the scripture and then walked to the side. "Do you want to listen to the scripture? I'll read it to you." Wei Bai immediately refused. "I'm not listening. Do you have a boring plague? It's fine if you're bored to the extreme, but you're still thinking of infecting others to be like you." Ning Chen patiently explained, "The scripture is very interesting. Wei Bai, when I look at you, I feel that the things you find interesting must be super boring. Damn, super old-fashioned." His EQ was so bad that even dogs would dislike him if he fed him to them. What he found interesting was definitely different from what others found interesting. However, Ning Chen raised his calm eyes and observed her for a moment. Then, he lightly looked away and said to himself, "Although your aptitude may be a little low, with my heavenly jewel protecting you, you can still walk the path of cultivation." Chapter 29:43. After saying that, he reached out and gently tapped between her eyebrows. "It's just that you have too many distracting thoughts. You can't be like this. In the future, clear your mind of all the distracting emotions and put aside your meaningless desires. Come and recite scriptures with me every day." Wei Bai reached out and covered her forehead. Her lips pouted and her cheeks immediately puffed up like an inflatable fish. She gritted her teeth and said coldly, "Monk, just say it. If you continue to attack me personally, I won't be polite anymore." Ning Chen suddenly took out a small wooden mallet used to knock a wooden fish from the side of the table and knocked her head. "Clear your mind and listen to my scriptures." He decided to let her walk the path of cultivation so that she wouldn't stray into the evil path and be killed by the great demons. She would cultivate herself and maintain her purity. In the end, she would become a little immortal. She still had a chance to become one of the guardian spirits of Wan Yuan Temple. At that time, she would be one of the holy objects. She could be protected by the temple. For example, the 10,000-year-old turtle in the large pond behind the temple. It was one of the holy objects. The old turtle had already understood human nature and could see through people's hearts. It could even divine things that had not happened. It was very well protected. She could also walk this path. She could cultivate some supernatural powers and then maintain her pure aura. She would not be stained with any evil things, harm people, or eat people. A demon's life was longer than a human's. When he passed away in the future, she could also be protected here. Wei Bai immediately jumped up and got up with both hands covering her head. She glared at him angrily. "Monk, you're not human. Are there no more monks in the temple? Are you starting to force others to be monks?" Ning Chen began to flip to the first page of the scripture. "Listen to me explain the scriptures for 4 hours every day." Wei Bai, it's too hard for her to listen to 4 hours of hypnotism every day. She immediately turned around and rushed out of the door without any hesitation. The door was open. She'd better go to sleep first. However, before she could cross the threshold, her collar was grabbed. She was grabbed by the fingertips and lifted. She became small again. The Buddha's light in her body was absorbed by the Buddha beads. She didn't have enough strength and became small again. And the Buddha beads that he gave her floated above her head again. The prayer beads were under the command of Ning Chen. Ning Chen's expression was indifferent. He put her on the table and said, "Let's begin." Wei Bai immediately stood up. Just as she was about to say something, a shadow suddenly struck her. She looked up in a daze and heard a thud. Very well, she was caught. A large begging bowl fell down with a thud. Wei Wei Bai sat in the dark with a dumbfounded expression. Then, he heard the young man's calm and clear voice. After you finish listening to the scripture, I'll let you go. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Chen began to recite some simple scriptures in a low voice. Then, he slowly explained. From the bowl came the sound of Wei Wei Bai hammering the bowl, as well as her jumping up and down shouting. Monk, you're committing a crime. You're just a brainwashing maniac. If you have the guts, let me out and I'll beat you to death. Marketing, brainwashing, although the general meaning of these words was known, no one had ever described him in this way. Ning Chen sat at the table with one hand supporting his cheek and the other holding the scripture. His tone was still light and indifferent. It was a lonely night. The sound of the little vixen jumping around was unusually lively. He looked down at the bowl and pursed his thin lips. Then, he began to preach again. Perhaps it wasn't for her, but for himself. The night was long. The young man quietly lowered his eyes, but he didn't find it unbearable at all. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. / you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2944. Wei Wei Bai felt like she was going to lose all sense of direction. She asked the system, "Do you want to get your hair cut and become a nun?" The system said, "I'll buy you a set of shaving tools. I guarantee that you'll become the most beautiful bald head." Wei Wei Bai touched her thick hair and said, "No, I suddenly feel like this is quite good." She had been sitting in the bowl for a week. At first, she thought that the monk was joking, but he really caught her every day and asked her to chant scriptures. So be it. She felt like she could become bigger now. Just a bite of the prayer beads could last for a long time. But every time she was caught, she would become smaller and be thrown into the bowl. Like this. Did he think she was a grasshopper? Did he think she would jump away without being caught? How could she seduce him like this? How could she seduce the monk and make his nose bleed? Then she would kick the monk out. You want me? You're not worthy, you damn bald donkey who only knows how to chant scriptures. This kind of plot made her blood boil just thinking about it. She felt good. This was the essence of the strong female protagonist novel. She suddenly missed the side quest. It was really good to her. She missed the strong female protagonist. Squatting in the bowl for 2 to 3 hours every day, Wei Wei Bai felt like she was about to evolve into a lotus spirit that knew how to beg for food. She knocked on the bowl helplessly. "Monk, let me out." Ning Chen sat on the chair and looked at the bowl in his hand indifferently. After he stopped chanting, he said softly, "There's still an hour before I let you out." Wei Wei Bai said, "I'm annoyed, let me out." Ning Chen said indifferently, "You're a lotus spirit. If you're annoyed, you should drink more water." Wei Wei Bai was angry. "This is illegal kidnapping, do you know? I don't want to listen to scriptures, I want to do something else." Ning Chen asked good-naturedly, "What do you want to do?" Wei Wei Bai said, "Do you?" Ning Chen was silent for a moment. What did this mean? Then, he understood. "You're not strong enough now. If you fight with me, you won't be able to gain any advantage. It's better to listen to scriptures more and cultivate honestly. With your poor aptitude, you'll be able to defeat me in about 80 years. Wei Wei Bai, 80 years. Ning Chen, at that time, I'll probably die of old age, and you'll be able to kill me. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Chen paused for a moment before continuing slowly, "You're a monster, you have a long life ahead of you. I'm just a speck of dust in your long life. Bear with it, learn the cultivation method, and become a sacred object. When you remember me after I die, I'm just an insignificant person. I'm not worth your anger. After saying this, Ning Chen slowly lowered his eyes and sighed softly. Then he picked up the book and was about to start chanting. However, he heard the little lotus spirit in the bowl suddenly say in a tender voice, "Monk, were you sad just now?" Ning Chen paused in his reading of the scriptures. His eyes were cold, but his thin lips were slightly pursed. He was about to say that he wasn't sad. However, he heard a muffled knocking sound from the bowl, followed by her voice. "Don't be sad, you're very important. I like you, I won't forget you. Monk, no matter how long my life is, it's meaningless if you're not with me." Ning Chen was still sitting, but his sitting posture was a little stiff. There was no expression on his delicate and fair face. His fingertips were slightly white as he held the book. Then he lowered his eyes and chuckled softly. The words of a child, "You're not mature yet. In this world, there's no meaning in leaving someone." / save button. You'll be able to see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 29:45. Wei Wei Bai began to kick the alms bowl again. "Stinky monk, you still don't believe me? I like you to death. Do you have ears? Won't you be moved after hearing this?" Ning Chen lowered his eyes and was silent for a while before saying softly, "Not moved." Then he ignored her and began to recite the scriptures. Wei Wei Bai felt her feet hurt. She kicked a target that was even harder than the alms bowl. Sure enough, the monk meditated for a long time and his brain and EQ turned to stone. Emotional retarded, he really was emotional retarded. She said to the system powerlessly, "I want to change the target." She hadn't had this impulse in a long time. When she met perverts before, she also wanted to change. But after meeting more perverts, she calmed down. One perverts after another, a bunch of targets were setting the standard for the most perverted perverts. In the end, she was used to dealing with these perverts. In the end, when she finally met a non-perverted one, she found that he was even worse than a pervert. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 30. In this week, because of listening to him recite the scriptures, the favorability had increased by 3 points. 28 favorability, plus 2 favorability. 30. It wasn't easy. Applause. The system said, "It's probably sympathy points. He feels that it's not easy for you, so he gave you a friendly point." The inside of the alms bowl was dark, and the outside of the alms bowl was filled with scriptures. Wei Wei Bai finally held her head with both hands. "Forget it, I'll just be a nun." Maybe after becoming a nun, the monk would feel that they were the same kind of people, a match of equal status, and suddenly the favorability would soar to the sky. The system was just about to comfort the host who was on the verge of collapse. But suddenly it heard the side mission ring again. "Dear, please check your side mission. If you don't check it, just force it. Please, before 12:00 tonight, climb into the target's bed and sing a little star for him to sleep. I am your side mission partner, your godly assistant, please remember to like." Side mission failure punishment. The host will eat shit with the system and broadcast it to the entire universe. After eating shit, the host will have to give a thumbs up and say that shit is the most delicious, yay yay yay. Already far away side quest note, 00 for your XXXX, I want XXXX your entire family's XXXX. Remember this, when I come back, I'm going to XXXX you. Wei Wei Bai, wait, what's wrong with the side quest? Such a simple side mission with such a cruel punishment. Also, what kind of confession was this, to leave such a violent and uncensored message? Blocked by the main system. Wei Wei Bai was confused. The system finally explained, it's like this. Recently, the side mission needs to earn money, so it went to a faraway place to do manual labor. Now, the side missions are automatically distributed randomly, and are not controlled by the side mission. Most of the random missions are very simple. If the side mission does not destroy the host's body. He was still afraid. Now, all of its power was being used to destroy the host's body. As a result, when he gave out the punishment mission, he only had enough energy left to start the simplest mission with no rules. 90% of the missions without rules were done by the host himself. The only thing the side mission could do was to specify the punishment. The system glanced at the location of the side mission. In the faraway galaxy, it was mining for a daily wage to offset the interest of the bank debt. This was to ensure that it would not be reformatted by the bank. It would be a lifetime of manual labor to pay the interest. Once it stopped paying the interest, it would be destroyed, //. Chapter 2946. The next side mission would also be a random mission, and it wouldn't be like this one, where there would be many missions. There would only be 1 or 2 missions. They were all beginner missions with a 90% success rate. The system felt good, it had gotten its revenge. Every single plane came to threaten him and his host. He had long held a grudge against it. I can't kill you, you little flea. After Wei Bai heard the system's explanation, she suddenly had an indescribable feeling towards the system world. How exploitative was the main system? Her family was poor and couldn't afford a house, so they thought it was bad enough. But the side mission actually reduced them to doing manual labor. She felt that this mission was too simple. Wait, how could she get out? She couldn't get out, she couldn't climb into bed, she couldn't sing. It was like eating shit and saying it was delicious. She immediately knocked on the door and said to the monk, "Monk, I'm tired, I want to sleep." Ning Chen quietly lowered his eyes and looked at the bowl for a while, then said lightly, "You're too lazy, your willpower isn't strong enough, stay here tonight and reflect on yourself, I'll let you out tomorrow." Wei Bai. Then Ning Chen heard a violent voice coming from the bowl. "Stupid monk, did all the monks in the temple run away, forcing people to listen to you chanting scriptures? What's wrong with you? Let me out. Do you think I can succeed by chanting scriptures? You'll only succeed in pissing me off. I like you, I don't like to hear you chanting scriptures. Let me out. If you don't let me out, I'll tell you, in the future when you're too old to walk, I'll hang you up on a swing, do you know?" Ning Chen, nonsense, you still need to cultivate, I'll lock you up until the day after tomorrow. Wei Bai, she touched her heart, talking to a man of steel, it was simply a heart attack. Forget it, this monk doesn't understand human language. She thought about it, it was better to use the trick of self-injury. Then she said weakly, "Monk, I feel so uncomfortable, I can't breathe." Ning Chen was silent for a while, then said, "Just drink more water." Wei Bai said with difficulty, "Where's the water?" Ning Chen opened the alms bowl and placed a teacup in front of her. The incomparably handsome young man said indifferently, "Drink." Wei Bai became smaller, and she grabbed the teacup with both hands, and discovered that she had turned into a crow. The crow that drank water. Even when he moved his mouth closer, he couldn't lick the water. Ning Chen saw that it was difficult for her to drink the water. After thinking for a while, he tilted the teacup and said softly, "Drink it like this." Wei Bai bent down and took a deep breath. Then, she looked up and revealed a happy smile. "Monk, since you are so worried about me, you must like me." Ning Chen said expressionlessly, "Do you still want to drink?" Wei Bai rubbed her belly and shook her head. Then, bang! The alms bowl was put down again. Wei Bai, Ning Chen said indifferently, "Continue listening to the scripture." Wei Bai, Ning Chen looked at the bowl that had calmed down and finally sighed. He had almost let her out. How could she cultivate successfully with such a leisurely temperament? He looked at the alms bowl calmly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Then, he continued to read the scripture in a steady voice. However, Wei Bai didn't see it in the alms bowl. The place where Ning Chen sat had become abnormally terrifying and distorted. The black aura turned into a huge shadow and slowly climbed up from his back. Its pale fingers touched Ning Chen's face. A silent hell was unfolding endlessly outside the alms bowl. The aura of the Buddha bone had accumulated since birth until now, and it had reached a terrifying level. / Chapter 2947. Ning Chen's heart just had a trace of desire, a crack. The dark aura had already seeped out everywhere. Ning Chen glanced at the pale finger on his shoulder indifferently. The owner of the finger was the pale girl, still with Wei Bai's face. His desire was just a little bit. The dark hell was full of her shadow. Ning Chen calmly stretched out his fingertip and shattered the girl's shadow. But the shadow that stretched out behind him and imprinted on the wall was abnormally terrifying and unbelievably huge. The shadow was twisting and swaying. Although it was silent, it sounded like thousands of murmurs in Ning Chen's ears. The beautiful young man was already indifferent. He stared at the alms bowl. Everything else was an illusion. Only this alms bowl was the real thing. When the shadow covered over, Ning Chen calmly opened the alms bowl. He saw Wei Bai sitting with her back to him, looking blankly at the suddenly bright place. Then she reacted and snorted coldly. "Damn monk, didn't you want to lock me up until the day after tomorrow? You'd better lock me up until you die. I've never seen a monk as annoying as you." The moment she spoke, all the illusions of the dark hell. They were all shattered one by one. Her clear and lovely voice was like the clear spring water, washing away the dark aura. Her original body was a purified body. So as long as she stayed by his side, she could always stay awake. Ning Chen looked down at her for a while, then slowly stretched out his fingertips and gently rubbed her head like a feather falling to the ground. "It's none of your business. If you're tired, you can rest." When Wei Bai heard this, her eyes immediately lit up. She turned around and revealed a cute smile. "You said it. I won't listen to you chanting scriptures." Ning Chen's calm eyes fell on her face for a while before moving away indifferently. "Well, I'll end it early today and continue tomorrow." However, the little lotus fairy turned her head coldly again. Ning Chen, he thought that she would not speak for a long time. He retracted his fingertips and was about to return the scriptures to the monk when he heard the little lotus fairy say softly, "If you can always be here, I don't mind chanting scriptures every day. I'm angry that you said you will die. Even if I die, you won't die." These words were willful. Who wouldn't die? Although there were thousands of capable people in the world, there would always be those with longevity. But he had never seen Sor become an immortal. Humans were humans after all. As long as demons did not harm others excessively and did not have any negative karma, they could live as long as heaven and earth. Ning Chen explained calmly, "Everyone has to die eventually." Wei Bai suddenly turned her head. Her eyes were red as she said, "Monk, do you even understand a woman's heart? I said that you are not to die. Would it kill you to agree? You're simply unreasonable. Bastard, you don't even know how to coax people. You damn bald donkey, you're just a piece of rotten wood." Ning Chen was stunned. There were a few words stuck in his mouth, but he couldn't say them. Only her red eyes made him feel stifled. It seemed a little stuffy. He thought for a moment and poked her back with his fingertips. Wei Bai immediately turned away. "Don't touch me. I'm angry." Ning Chen was silent again. Then he silently retracted his finger. Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned around and hugged his finger. Why aren't you touching me? Do you dislike me? Ning Chen was silent for a while before he said softly, You asked me not to touch you. Wei Wei Bai glared at him coldly. I said I won't touch you. I said I don't want to listen to you chanting scriptures, so why did you do it? When did you become so obedient? Sometimes you have to listen to a girl's words. / save button. Chapter 2948. Ning Chen looked at her for a while and nodded. Wei Wei Bai let go of his fingers, but he reached out again and touched her hair. Rest. His voice was indifferent. Wei Wei Bai touched her hair. Don't use so much strength, it's bald. Then she yawned and softened her voice. I want to sleep on the bed. Ning Chen thought for a while and didn't misunderstand. He lifted her up and put her on his bed. Side mission, climb into his bed. Wei Wei Bai sat on the soft quilt and suddenly narrowed her eyes. Monk, I'll sing for you, okay? Ning Chen sat on the bed and looked at her calmly. He didn't say yes or no. Wei Wei Bai sat up straight and cleared her throat. Twinkle twinkle little star, the sky is full of little stars. Ning Chen thought for a while, this is he go. Why haven't I heard of her before? But the way she sang so seriously was very cute. Ning Chen looked at her quietly and his eyes softened. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 35. After Wei Wei Bai finished singing and completed the simple side mission, she lay down. Then she pulled a corner of the huge quilt and squeezed under it, squinting her eyes and saying, I'm tired, monk. Ning Chen saw that she was almost squashed by the quilt. After thinking for a while, he finally returned the prayer beads to her and the golden power poured into her body. She suddenly became bigger. Her legs under the quilt also stretched out. Her white skin was shining under the light. Ning Chen pulled the quilt and covered her with it, then said, You sleep here, I'm going to read the scriptures. After saying that, he got up and was about to leave. Behind him, a pair of fair and delicate hands softly wrapped around his waist. The girl behind him was full of the fragrance of flowers, weakly sticking to him. Monk, her lips lightly brushed against his ear, don't you want to stay and sleep with me? It was soft and sweet. Ning Chen's body stiffened, then he reached out to grab her fingers. Just as his fingertips landed on the back of her hand, he found that her skin was exceptionally delicate, as if it would break with a pinch. After all, it was the original form of a lotus, and lotus flowers were very delicate. His fingers also paused, but he didn't use too much force. He only said indifferently, let go. However, Wei Wei Bai seemed to be hanging on his body. Her tone became enchanting. Monk, it's not that I want to criticize you, but how can a demon be a good person? You said it yourself, we demons are born to eat humans. Ning Chen frowned slightly. You want to eat people. Wei Wei Bai's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. Ning Chen suddenly felt that his neck was licked by something soft. This feeling was too unfamiliar, causing his scalp to tighten for a moment. Then, he heard the lotus spirit behind him say slowly, Of course I do. I've always wanted to. From the first time I saw you, I wanted to eat you. Ning Chen's mind went blank for a moment. He pursed his lips and said, Restrain your greed. Even if you want to eat, don't take action. After all, fairies still have a desire for human flesh. You're just temporarily. Ning Chen's words paused fiercely. The girl's fingers probed into his clothes. She couldn't help but laugh. Her laughter was sweet and soft. Why are you so unromantic? Monk, who wants to eat the flesh of your stinky skin? Don't you often meet female demons who want to seduce you? So am I. I'm in cahoots with them. Ning Chen, He was about to use his power to flip her over. But he heard her voice soften. She was exceptionally aggrieved and pitiful. "Monk, I'm craving you. I want to eat you every day, but I can't eat you. Please pity me and save me. Let me succeed this time. // Chapter 2949. Ning Chen lowered his eyes and stopped breathing for a while. Then he reached out and pressed her restless fingers. He pulled her fingers out of his body one by one. She pressed herself firmly against his skin under his clothes, refusing to let go no matter what. "Monk, don't you want to?" Ning Chen's face was still and his tone was very steady. "No." Then his fingertips paused and he withdrew some of his strength. Sure enough, Wei Wei Bai behind him became small again. She still refused to give up. She grabbed his collar with both hands and hung on his back. She shouted, "Monk, you're cheating. If you have the guts, let's fight one-on-one. Just admit it. You felt something just now." Ning Chen reached out and gently touched her back. Finally, he grabbed her collar and lifted her up. Then he put her on the bed. Before Wei Wei Bai could react, he had already waved his hand. And the alms bowl flew over. She was caught again. "You don't learn good things, but you go outside to learn some dirty things. It seems that you didn't listen to enough scriptures. From today onwards, you will listen to scriptures for 8 hours instead of 4. You have so many distracting thoughts. How can you cultivate? Look at the old black turtle behind the mountain. That is your example." Then, as Ning Chen wished, he heard the sound of the little lotus fairy kicking the bowl. "Monk, you're comparing me to an old black turtle. Am I that ugly?" Ning Chen finally reached out and held his forehead. His usually calm expression finally showed a trace of helplessness. Sure enough. The brain structure of a human and a fairy was different. Their conversation seemed to be from a different world. But why did she suddenly think of seducing him? Ning Chen suddenly remembered that when he took her to the exquisite banquet, the exquisite sect leader created the illusion of everything in the world to shake his mind. It was full of the temptation of everything in the world. Because she was not in the bureau, she was not specifically targeted by the illusion. She saw relatively few things. But such few things were enough to teach her bad things. Ning Chen pondered for a moment before calmly taking out the small wooden mallet. He knocked on the alms bowl, and the crisp sound of vibration made the little demon inside feel dizzy. Then he took out the scripture that calmed the mind and began to read. He had to get rid of all the bad things in her head. Let her return to the purity of her original body. Cultivation wasn't that easy. Look at the old tortoise. He had cultivated for 10,000 years before he had the divine ability. Therefore, he had no choice but to keep an eye on her. Otherwise, when he was 100 years old, she would go and eat other people. He listened to the scriptures floating in from outside the bowl. Wei Wei Bai calmly rested her chin on her hand. Monks are indeed not easy to win over. The system gnawed on the shiny chicken leg and asked curiously, "Why did you use this method?" "Maybe the monk likes the gentler one." In the host's dimension. She was simply a naive and sweet spirit that made people want to beat her to death. But thinking back to the past, it seemed that it was normal for the host to act like this. That was why he was so calm. Wei Wei Bai rubbed her chin and said indifferently, "Aren't we trying to stir up the desires in the monk's mind? This wooden monk, his emotions are made of stone. You have to break it. Making him like and admire me is not a problem. The difficult part is that he doesn't treat me as a woman." Yes, she had long discovered Ning Chen. He had the same mentality when looking at men and women. In his eyes, there were only good people, bad people, demons and so on. There was no distinction between gender. There was only the difference between erasing and saving. In his eyes, she was between erasing and saving. // Chapter 2950. She was a demoness, but she did not harm anyone. She even grew out of his spirit pool. She even saved him. She could purify, and everything was to his liking. Other than being a demoness, she was a demoness that did not harm anyone. She had almost no flaws. If she was gentle and magnanimous, or even strong as his right-hand woman, she would accompany him. She could also gain some favorability. Good friend favorability, or partner favorability. Love. What, you said love? He did not have any gender in his eyes, where would love come from? So that Ling Long, isn't she just desperately using some cheap and flirtatious illusions to hook his addiction? This was an absolutely correct train of thought. This kind of illusion made the monk realize that there was a difference between men and women. Wei Wei Bai said, if he sees too many illusions, it will leave a mark in his heart. Let him know that women have long legs, small waists, and that thing is incomparably plump. It doesn't matter if he doesn't have any thoughts. Anyway, if he has this awareness, in the future, if a woman comes to climb into his bed, he will not kill her as a spider spirit. This way, his stone emotions will be slightly moved. The system looked at Wei Wei Bai from head to toe. Your legs are not long, and you didn't see anything. Lotus was originally a slender figure, and she was still small. Legs were short. Her body was flat. Wei Wei Bai touched her chest, and a cold wind blew. Indeed, it was flat. She moved her mouth, and finally coldly changed the topic. So I can't be gentle and magnanimous. I have to be pretentious, so that he can't be at ease. Following my temper every day, after a long time, he will unknowingly move his emotions. The monk was a stone. He was indifferent to being his gentle partner for 100 years. If she wanted him to look at her, she would have to kill him. She wanted him to realize that she was a woman at all times. She lusted after him and liked him. Then he would think about what was a man and woman, what was lusting. Once he understood, he would fall into a trap. Then she would attack and seduce him in the future to gain favorability between men and women. After the system heard this, it was gratified. I thought you liked the feeling of being pretentious, that's why you kept bullying an honest person. After all, it would be too much to deal with a pervert. But with such a small amount of favorable impression points, he would have been killed long ago. Wei Wei Bai laughed. Am I that kind of person? After saying that, she said expressionlessly, that's right. It's rare to meet an honest person. It's so refreshing to bully him. The system was silent for a moment, then took a bite of the drumstick. As expected, he was very much like his host. Then, the little troublemaker who wanted to bully others was trapped in the bowl and listened to the scriptures for an entire night. In the morning, Wei Wei Bai had dark circles under her eyes. Her face was full of emptiness. All of a sudden, I feel that everything can be thrown away. I want to wander around with the monks, beg for food, and be a nun. The system said, wake up, host. You're just not getting enough sleep. Don't be hypnotized. Ning Chen's voice really had a hypnotizing effect. This was because the essence of the cultivation scripture was a marketing tool. The more people listened, the more they believed him. Wei Wei Bai's face was full of yearning. No, I think that being a nun is really beautiful. The system sighed. Come, I have a razor. Give me your head, and I'll shave off that beautiful, long, shiny, thick head of yours. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, then touched her hair. Then she came to a realization. Forget it, I think that being a demon is pretty good. Chapter 2951. She couldn't bear to part with her hair, so she stopped being a nun. Although she had to continue with the strategy, the monk's chanting was too scary. No matter how determined Weiwei was, she couldn't withstand his chanting. If she listened to it for a few more days, she would probably become a holy object like the old tortoise behind her. Oh right, that old tortoise was bald too. Weiwei felt that it was better to go out for a walk. Since she had no time to play with the strategy every day, she needed to clear her mind. She didn't want to be taken over by the scriptures. So she left a piece of paper for the monk, carried a bag wrapped in lotus leaves, and sneaked out of the temple. The system gave her a bunch of cover to help her escape. Is this one of the objectives of the strategy? Weiwei thought for a while, then said, I want to buy a mirror. Damn it, she hadn't seen her own face for so long. The water in the spirit pool was hazy, and the reflection of her face was too distorted. She couldn't see clearly, and her heart was itching. The system said, then your body can only last for 3 days, remember to come back early. The prayer beads were held back again. Ning Chen was afraid that if she grew bigger, she would tempt him. He gave her a little strength every day, so that she wouldn't be able to escape from his grasp even if she jumped around. He said that he would give her the prayer beads whenever she changed her mind and wanted to cultivate. Weiwei touched her hair and refused. If she continued to cultivate, she would really become a nun. When Ning Chen saw the note, he came back from his morning class. There was only one simple sentence on the paper. Monk, I'm not going to play with you anymore, I'm leaving. The little fairy ran away. He looked at it expressionlessly for a while, then the paper suddenly shattered into golden light and disappeared. Then he sat down indifferently and continued to read the scriptures. The house was empty, and the spirit pool not far from the door was hazy and quiet. It was as if all the sounds in the world had disappeared. Ning Chen looked down indifferently, his delicate face was like a frozen sculpture, without a trace of emotion. After some time, he looked up and looked around, then deliberately walked to the door to take a look. After he finished, he stood there for a while. Then he returned and continued to meditate on the futon. He meditated for a moment. He got up again and went to copy the scriptures. Halfway through, he turned to knock on the wooden fish. Knock on the wooden fish, knock on the wooden fish. However, he found that other than the sound of the wooden fish, there was only silence in this place. Ning Chen stopped knocking the wooden fish and sat quietly with his eyes closed. When the sunlight shone in, it was like gold scattered all over the ground. However, the shadow once again appeared from his body. Her pale fingers gently caressed his face. She was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a country. Silently, she stuck close to him. She was so beautiful. The illusions created by the dark hell were becoming clearer and clearer. Because the more time he spent with her, the more he understood her. The more illusions hell created, the more realistic they were. Everything was built with him as the foundation. The pale demoness smiled gently. Suddenly, she whispered, Monk, I'm hungry for you. I want to eat you. Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while. Then, he reached out with his fingertips and gently crushed her. He watched as she turned into a dark speck of light and dissipated into the sunlight. Only then did he slowly get up and walk out step by step. He stepped on the sunlight and walked in the darkness. She had become so small. Where could he go? If he left the temple, he would probably be taken away by birds. Moreover, her roots were in the spiritual pond. If she did not drink water for a few days, she would wither. The water outside could not save her. Ning Chen walked to the side of the pond and filled a bottle with water. Then, he threw away the prayer beads and turned them into a floating robe. Slash. Chapter 2952. He stepped on it. He was just going to deliver water. Ning Chin thought calmly. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 40. Wei Wei Bai heard the favorability prompt, but didn't care at all. She was trying to communicate with the frog spirit. Yes, turn into a human and help me by a mirror. Frog spirit, gugugu, sit on my hand, remember to sit tight. Wei Wei Bai nodded. The frog spirit turned into a human, a green-skinned person with a long tongue. He held Wei Wei Bai in his hand and hopped forward. Gugugu, the night market is open, we gugugu can find mirrors, remember to gugugu to catch mosquitoes for me. Wei Wei Bai, okay, I'll catch 100 mosquitoes for you, I promise. Night market of the fairies. The only difference was that it was different from the human market. It was full of fairies here. This was a trade and shopping gathering organized by various Buddhists to avoid humans. After all, fairies also had needs. Wei Wei Bai was too small, so the system recommended her to come here. After all, there were all kinds of strange things here, so it didn't lack a little fairy like her. Even smaller ones, there were ant spirits. The frog spirit put her on the table of a vendor selling mirrors. Then it hopped away. I'm going to buy something else, I'll pick you up later. The daffodil spirit selling the mirrors said, a mirror has 3 years of life. Wei Wei Bai was very sensitive to life points, so she immediately raised her eyebrows. Can I change it to something else? The daffodil spirit shook the flower on its head and suddenly looked at her. Its eyes lit up, and there was a trace of greed in its eyes. You have a purified body, and you're so cute. Wei Wei Bai felt that this flower spirit was up to no good. The flower spirit took out a small mirror with its green hand and put it beside Wei Wei Bai. Look at this mirror, does it look good? Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes, then turned around and hopped off the table. Still looking, what the hell? This flower spirit is up to no good. In the end, before she could jump out, she saw herself being picked up by the flower spirit. Wei Wei Bai looked around and realized that she had jumped into a mirror. The system flipped through the list of items in the supermarket. This is the devil's mirror. It can lock up humans and devils, but it won't hurt them. You didn't see it just now, but your figure was reflected in it, so you were locked up. I'll look at the props and buy something to counter the mirror. The flower fairy happily held the mirror and spun around. I actually caught such a cute little fairy. You're too beautiful, you're simply made for my beauty. I'll make you into my hairpin. Wei Wei Bai looked serious. No, you're much uglier than me. If you turn me into a hairpin and put it on your head, people will only see me and not you. You're stealing the limelight. The flower spirit was stunned for a moment before angrily rebuking, I'm much prettier than you. Wei Wei Bai, you're much prettier than me. If you make me into a hairpin, wouldn't that mean that I'm not good enough for you? Then why did you catch me? This logic, actually couldn't be refuted. The flower fairy held the mirror and was momentarily stunned. The system had already chosen the escape tool. Just as it was about to click on the button to place the order, it suddenly frowned and looked not far away. There was the scent of the male lead. Wei Wei Bai and the flower fairy were arguing in full swing. Both of them were arguing that they were the prettiest. The flower fairy was finally angry. It held the mirror up and tilted it towards its mouth. I'm going to eat you to make up for my beauty. Wei Wei Bai still had the time to say, you really have good taste. You know that I'm very beautiful. Otherwise, how can you make up for it? Seeing that the flower fairy was about to bite her, Wei Wei Bai hugged her head and scurried around the mirror. Tongzi, did you buy the props? The reason she was arguing with the flower fairy was to stall for time. It definitely wasn't to argue that she was the prettiest. The system, I think you don't need to buy them. Though the full article is at https://www.sashu.com/ the next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. If you liked the comma. Chapter 2953. Wei Wei Bai was about to ask if there were any other ways to escape. But then she heard a sigh. I told you, most of the demons are bad, yet you still dare to come here. As soon as the words were said, a youth was already standing quietly in front of the stall. The prayer beads in his hand were floating, and the cinnabar mark on his forehead was exceptionally gorgeous. The flower fairy was stunned, then her whole body trembled, her face pale. Who were the demons most afraid of? Ning Qin. This guy was the nemesis of demons. Recently, when he destroyed the exquisite banquet, he also killed all the great demons and great demons there. That was a great demon that they had to kneel before. Now, the name Ning Qin was a killing god in their demon world. The youth glanced at the flower fairy, his eyes cold to the bone. He stretched out his hand. This is a demon that escaped from my spiritual pool, return it to me. The flower fairy immediately turned into a flattering little person. My lord, everything is yours. Is there anything else you want? Ning Chen took the mirror in his hand and looked at the little demon trapped in the mirror. His eyes were indifferent as he quietly stared at the little demon lying in the mirror with a dazed expression. In the future, don't be so thoughtless. After saying that, he turned and left. The flower fairy immediately bowed and sent him off. Looking at his back as he left, she spat. Stinky monk. After spitting, she suddenly realized that something was wrong with her. Her body, why did it disappear? The flower fairy and her stall were instantly shattered by the Buddhist light. Wei Wei Bai was trapped in the mirror, sitting there obediently. Ning Chen was expressionless. When he walked to a bush, he suddenly said, You signed a contract with a frog to help it catch 100 mosquitoes. Wei Wei Bai nodded. I think so. Ning Chen stood there for a long time before sighing. How can you casually sign a contract? If you don't complete it, your merit will be damaged, and it will be difficult for you to cultivate. After saying that, he gently stretched out his hand and picked her up. Wei Wei Bai immediately understood and was picked up between his fingers. She stared at him with her beautiful eyes, revealing an awkward but polite smile. I'm just upset, so I came out to relax. Ning Chen looked at her quietly for a while and then put her on the leaves of the grass. Then, he crouched down. The handsome young man lowered his voice quite a bit. Let's begin. Wei Wei Bai was confused. Start what? Ning Chen said, catching mosquitoes requires accumulating merit points. You have a contract, so you have to abide by it. There are many mosquitoes here, so you can only leave after you catch 100 of them. Wei Wei Bai sat on a wobbly leaf. I'm so small, how can I catch it? Ning Chen was silent for a while before saying, Mosquitoes are smaller than you. Wei Wei Bai immediately stretched out her hands and imitated flapping wings. Mosquitoes can fly. Ning Chen faintly arched an eyebrow. You knew that mosquitoes could fly, and you were so small that I couldn't catch you, so you actually lied and didn't intend to abide by the contract. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, looking guilty. He sighed faintly, then helplessly took out a bottle and handed it to her. Drink some, then I'll give you some Buddhist light to catch the mosquitoes. Wei Wei Bai drank the water and became bigger again. Then, she squatted in the grass with Monk Ning and began to catch mosquitoes. She caught one. Monk Ning counted indifferently. 13. She caught another one. 14. As he counted, there were already 100 mosquitoes. 100 mosquitoes were packed in a bottle. Ning Chen stretched out his hand and pointed at them, and they immediately disappeared. Send them to the demon who signed a contract with you. In the future, you're not allowed to sign contracts with other demons. There's a kind of contract among demons called the master-slave contract. If you sign it, you'll become someone else's slave. After saying that, Ning Chen stood up and summoned the Dharma robe. It's time to go back. After stepping on the Dharma robe, he turned around and stared at Wei Wei Bai with a calm expression. Are you still upset? Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, then shook her head and said, Monk, I'm not upset with you. I'm just upset that there's no mirror in the temple. It's scary without a mirror for girls. You don't understand this. Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while, then stretched out his hand indifferently. Let's go. Wei Wei Bai jumped up and obediently held his hand. He pulled her into the Dharma robe. On the way back, the mountains and rivers flowed under their Dharma robes. She was a little tired, so she leaned her head on the monk's shoulder. Her voice was muffled and she was unusually sleepy. Monk, lend me your shoulder. I'm sleepy. Ning Chen's body was a little stiff. He was silent for a long time before he faintly answered. Soon, he heard the little demon's even breathing sound. Ning Chen stared in front of him. After a long time, he faintly lowered his eyes and saw the girl leaning on his shoulder. After looking for a while, he quietly moved his eyes away. Wei Wei Bai slept until dawn. When she opened her eyes, she found herself occupying the monk's bed. Ning Chen stood in the morning light, flipping through the scriptures. When he saw that she had woken up, he said indifferently, Go back to the spiritual pool and soak yourself. You haven't touched water for a few days. Wei Wei Bai also felt that she had dried up. Without water, her face was not fresh anymore. She stretched out her hand to comb her hair as she walked out. Suddenly, she heard Ning Chen calmly say, Take the mirror on the table. Wei Wei Bai's footsteps paused. When she turned her head, she saw a mirror lying on the table. It was the mirror that trapped her last night. Wei Wei Bai walked over and picked it up. Ning Chen still had his back to her. His tone was calm, It has been consecrated and purified. This mirror will not harm others. Wei Wei Bai held the mirror and stared at him for a while. Then, she suddenly laughed, Monk, you said that you don't like me. Don't tell me that you gave me a token of love, /download at https://m. Chapter 2954. Ning Chen was silent for a moment. Just as he was about to turn around and refute, he found that Wei Wei Bai had already run away with the mirror. It was as if she was afraid that he would go back. He looked at the door for a long time before turning around. Then, he picked up a heart-cleansing sutra and read it silently. He had read many of them. It seemed that he had to continue reading. He thought that as long as she had a mirror, she would listen to the sutra and cultivate obediently. However, when he brought her to cultivate at night, Wei Wei Bai held a shrunken mirror and stuck her face to the mirror. Monk, let me look at you again. Let me look at you again. Don't you think that I'm more beautiful than she sure and can captivate the birds and beasts? With my appearance, it would be a waste if I didn't go out and seduce a few nobles. Because the mirror had been consecrated, the evil aura on it dissipated. However, it still retained a large amount of power, which changed according to the host's mood. He looked at the little Wei Wei Bai who was sitting on the sutra and holding the shrunken mirror. Sometimes she would grin foolishly, sometimes she would reach out to stroke her hair, and sometimes she would twist her waist. Ning Chen reached out and pinched her small mirror, wanting to take it away. However, he found that Wei Wei Bai held the mirror and opened her mouth to bite his finger again. His fingertips paused, but he didn't take it away forcefully. Instead, he slowly moved away from her. Listen to the sutra first, then look at the mirror. She had been looking at it for several days, but she didn't get tired of it. Monk Ning didn't know what was going on in the head of this demon. It seemed that it was just the same face. He didn't know whether it was beautiful or not, but she didn't get tired of it. Wei Wei Bai twisted her body and turned her back to him. She held the mirror in front of her face and tidied up the buds in her hair. Humph, what do you know, stinky monk? You're a man, so you don't know anything about girls. Ning Chen held the sutra and looked at her small back. He fell into a deep silence and then thought quietly. Male, female, demon, plant, stone, heaven and earth. There didn't seem to be any difference in nature. So, girls. What was the difference between them and other things? Were their brains different? Ning Chen pondered for a while, then suddenly poked her back with her fingertips. Wei Wei Bai immediately turned around and glared at him. Don't disturb me from looking in the mirror. Ning Chen was silent for a while before he asked slowly, is it better for you to hold a mirror? Or eat some spiritual energy to fill your stomach? No matter how beautiful she was. There was no point in being hungry when there was nothing to eat. Wei Wei Bai immediately glanced at the mirror and hesitated for a moment before saying, it's really a dilemma. If I don't eat, my skin will deteriorate. It will also make my experience of looking in the mirror worse. Ning Chen asked, you eat so you can look in the mirror? Wei Wei Bai covered her face and raised her eyes slightly. Even though her beautiful face was small, it was still exceptionally delicate. Of course. There are thousands of beautiful things in this world that don't belong to me. I am the only one that belongs to me. I am so beautiful. Just looking at me a few more times is enjoyment. This was Ning Chen's first time encountering a demon with so many twisted logic. Wei Wei Bai suddenly jumped up. The little demon held a small mirror and jumped onto his arm. She ran all the way up his arm that was placed horizontally on the table. When it was too steep, she wanted to grab it with one hand. Ning Chen looked at her indifferently and slowly raised his arms so that she wouldn't have to climb so hard. His eyes were exceptionally clear, but also so deep that one couldn't see the bottom of them. What's wrong? He asked softly. The little Wei Wei Bai raised the mirror and looked at him. The mirror was too small and he was too big. Nothing could be seen. /save button. Chapter 2955. Wei Wei Bai stood on her tiptoes and brought the mirror closer to his face. Monk, you're very beautiful. The first time I saw you, I felt that nothing in the world could compare to your beauty. She smiled and said, look in the mirror and you'll know that I'm not lying. Her words were too frivolous. But her tone was too serious, so serious that he couldn't bear to refute it. He thought for a while, and just as he was about to take back a body that didn't care about beauty or ugliness, he saw that Wei Wei Bai had already turned the mirror back, and she began to look in the mirror again. Of course, this feeling disappeared when I saw myself in the mirror. No matter how beautiful you are, you're not as beautiful as me. Ning Chen was speechless. Then, his eyes turned cold, and his fingertips touched the small mirror. The mirror immediately disappeared. Then, he picked up Wei Wei Bai and put her on the table. Bang! The alms bowl was put down. He said coldly, looks like you haven't listened to enough scriptures, and you still can't let go of such a basic obsession like a body. How are you going to cultivate? Listen to the scriptures carefully. After you're done, I'll give you the mirror. Then, he began to chant, and his tone became more urgent. As if he wanted to suppress the incomprehensible thoughts in Wei Wei Bai's mind. Wei Wei Bai crossed her arms and said to the system, forget it, I thought that since there was a mirror, I could slowly and steadily conquer it, and everyone would be fine. Now, I suddenly feel that slowly and steadily is too boring, let's do something more intense. The system said, how do you want it to be intense? Wei Wei Bai said, fairies have a berserk period, I'll do it to wake him up, and let him know what the joy of a body is. The system said, you're not a real fairy. It was a lotus flower with a sticker and the male protagonist's power. That was why it was in such a strange state. When the side mission destroyed the body, it used up all its power, and must not leave any information of the host's identity behind. So that he couldn't rebuild the body. The host's state was still a plant. Not a fairy. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, pretend for a bit. Show me some of the goblins in their berserk state. The system immediately searched for it, and then gave her the video of the fairy in a frenzied state. The sprites of this plane had a growth period, which was the berserk state. During this period of time, he would not be able to control his actions. For example, eating people, attacking people, or destroying things. In any case, going berserk meant attacking others indiscriminately. The system had eaten too much recently and could not keep up with the host's pace. What can the berserk state do? Wouldn't this make the male lead feel that you can't control yourself and have thoughts of destroying you? This male lead. He was an honest male lead. The reason why it kept the host alive was because it felt that the host had just been born and was still pure and didn't know how to harm others. Therefore, the host's attack power was too terrifying. Honest monk was probably going to kill the demon. Wei Wei Bai's expression was calm as she stared into the darkness. Suddenly, she whispered to the system, the monk won't kill me. He has ulterior motives. The system said, what do they want from you? It's a good thing. Didn't she do so much to enlighten the monk? Bai Wei Wei slowly shook her head, this is a wooden lump. What he yearns for is a kind of extremely cold heavenly law. Everything is illusory, the flesh sac is insignificant, even desire, attachment, feelings, and the difference between men and women are insignificant. The system said, if that's what he yearns for, what does he want from you? Appearance was no longer important, he couldn't be greedy for the host's beauty. The is at https://m/sashu. Com / the save button below to record this reading record. Chapter 2956. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. I don't know what he wants from me. Anyway, he had a vague intention from the beginning. It seems that he wants to get something from me to evolve himself. That's why I dared to court death. I was also sure that he wouldn't kick me away. Ning Chen was a person like that. He wouldn't bring a demon for no reason. Then he would teach her cultivation. He wouldn't let her roll around and make a scene and not kick her away. The system flipped through the information, but it couldn't find any intention of the male lead. Wei Wei Bai, this is a kind of intuition, but it could be wrong. Maybe the monk doesn't have any intention, but simply likes to be a demon. After saying that, she continued to look at the demon's berserk state. Oh my god, the fangs are out. This is a pig demon. So ugly. In the end, Wei Wei Bai finally deducted some life points and bought some inferior demon's berserk potion. The supermarket really went all out for performance, and this thing was really sold. It was just that the duration was very short. And it wouldn't make the host's brain irrational, appearance, and berserk aura could be imitated. Only the state was still played by the host. Ning Chen's chanting speed increased a little, and he soon found that his mind was unstable. He suppressed his fluctuating emotions. Just as he was about to take another scripture, he found that an unstable aura appeared from the bowl. It seemed like something was pulling the air, making it difficult to breathe. He stared at the bowl with lowered eyes. The bowl had power, the power of protection. Once she entered this place, no demon could invade her. But there was something wrong with her aura. It wasn't possessed, nor was it controlled by external objects. Demon's berserk state. Ning Chen's expression changed slightly, and he immediately reached out to open the bowl. Sure enough, he saw that Wei Wei Bai's eyes were red, and there were demon lines at the corners of her eyes. There were a few red lines on her beautiful face, and the demon's sharp teeth were exposed on both sides of her thin lips. Even her face and ears were a little longer. This was the appearance of a berserk demon. She narrowed her eyes, seemingly without any rationality, and looked back at Ning Chen coldly. It was indeed the berserk state. Ning Chen frowned for a moment, and suddenly reached out to grab her. Fairies would attack indiscriminately at times like this. Moreover, they would crave for human flesh. There was no sense of reason. It was at this time that many fairies attacked humans and experienced the benefits of eating humans, which was why they continued to degenerate. Ning Chen didn't use his Buddhist light. Instead, he used his fingertip to lift her up. However, Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out, grabbed his finger, and bit it hard. It was different from the previous biting for fun. This bite tore through the skin, and the sharp teeth pierced into the skin, causing blood to gush out. Bright red beads of blood appeared on his white fingertips. She seemed to have detected the smell of blood. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she stuck out the tip of her tongue and licked it. Ning Chen immediately retracted his finger, but found that it was too late. His blood contained the power of the Buddha light. Sure enough, after she drank the blood, her entire body immediately grew bigger, and even her lotus dress turned completely red. She was wearing a bright red dress and her slender ankles were so fair that she was excessively beautiful. The beautiful seductress sat on the table. Her eyes had long lost their clarity and were instead filled with a seductive red. She stuck out her tongue and lightly licked her moist lips. He seemed to be tasting something. Then, she widened her eyes slightly, and her lips curled up, revealing a nasty and greedy smile. This kind of her lacked her usual delicate purity. There was only a soul-stirring seductress, a wanton beauty, and a temptation that made people have no way to retreat. // Chapter 2957. Her eyes were clear and charming, and her face was absolutely beautiful. Monk, save me. She stretched out her beautiful fingers and beckoned him. Ning Chen was in a trance. He found himself reaching out, holding her fingers, and then gently placing them on his lips. Soft and fragrant, like flames and snow. The feeling of alternating hot and cold made his body tremble. It was just an extremely unfamiliar feeling. It was the first time he had tasted it. Ning Chen came back to his senses, only to find that the little minx had stopped what she was doing and was staring at him blankly. He looked down in panic and saw that he was holding her hand. Then he put his lips on the back of her hand. His moist thin lips printed on the girl's white and tender skin. He quickly let go, and his heart suddenly beat faster. A trace of embarrassment appeared on his usually cold face, and panic appeared in his dead eyes. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a long time, then suddenly smiled. Monk, I've calmed down. Thank you for your spiritual energy to help me pass through the berserk period. You're really a kind and compassionate Buddha. After saying that, she immediately retreated. The cold water slid over her body, and her black hair scattered on the clear water. The beautiful girl lazily reached out and grabbed a lotus, then hid behind it. Only her snow-white back was exposed. Her voice was soft. Monk, you can go now. The fluctuation of spiritual energy calmed down for a while. She leaned on the flower and slowly held the lotus leaves with her fingers. She seemed to be a little worried. Suddenly, a hand lightly fell on her shoulder. The girl seemed to be unprepared. She blankly turned her head, only to see that the young man had already come to her side. His expression was still cold, but there was a trace of forbearance in his handsome face. He looked at the tears in her eyes. "Why are you crying?" His voice was somewhat blank. The young man who had always been indifferent to everything in the world seemed to have encountered such a situation for the first time. Why was she crying? This question seemed to be more important than becoming a Buddha. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. Suddenly, her tears turned into laughter. She lowered her head and rubbed her eyes. While rubbing, she said, "Monk, you make me so happy." Ning Chen lowers his eyes and keeps quiet for a while. He seems to be puzzled by her crying and laughing at the same time. She reached out and gave him a push. "You should leave. You are a Buddhist cultivator. I only touched you when I was in my berserk state and touched your Buddhist heart. I won't do it again." In the end, there were only 3 words. He softened his voice, carrying obvious sadness. Ning Chen stared at her for a while. He couldn't help but reach out his hand to touch the tears on her face. However, he found that what he touched was a lotus. It was a beautiful and delicate lotus flower. The little lotus stretched out its leaves and covered its face. It said in a tender voice, "Monk, you can go. I'm fine now. Don't worry." Ning Chen soaked in the water, exposing his fair shoulders. Water droplets slid down his flawless skin and fell into the water. He looked at her for a while. Then, he slowly pulled his clothes out of the water and turned around with his body covered in water vapor. He was just about to leave. Then he heard the little lotus say, "I'll listen to you chanting again tomorrow." Ning Chen lowered his head, not saying anything. Only then did he leave. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. Sor was stunned by the favorable impression points. 55. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her leaves and stroked her painted face. The little bald donkey is beginning to know what a woman is, so his emotions are exploding. He had always regarded her as a demoness who was neither male nor female. Even if his favorability increased, he didn't realize what kind of emotion it was. Chapter 2958. After so long, she finally made him realize what a woman was. She was a tiger, little monk. Wei Wei Bai covered her lotus face and giggled. "I'm really a disaster." The system was changing his clothes expressionlessly. After all, his body was too small, so he couldn't wear a lot of clothes. He felt that he could grow up quickly in the future. It didn't matter if the clothes were too big. But after the divinity ran out to do evil, he realized that he might not grow up so easily. Because he had to store his strength now. To help the human male leads suppress the divinity. At least until the host could live a long life. So for a long time, he estimated that he would look like a 4 or 5-year-old. The system heard the host's words and nodded in agreement. "You're so beautiful that the world is moved." The old tortoise flips over, the bald donkey kneels down. When the little lotus fairy heard it, she immediately looked up at the plate and suddenly felt that she was the most beautiful person in the world. "Although your tone of praise is emotionless, but it just sounds good." The system said, "When you're a woman, does that mean his favorability will increase, and his favorability points will increase every day?" Wei Wei Bai shook her lotus leaf. "It still depends on the pace of the strategy. Anyway, the strategy time is still pending, so I'll drag it out as long as I can." The system was confused. The host wanted to drag it out and didn't want to leave. Could it be that she liked honest monk? In the end, he saw Wei Wei Bai holding her lotus face and looking at the hazy water surface. "I'm the most beautiful person in this world. If I don't look at it for a few more years, I'll lose money." The system was speechless. Okay, he continued to change the clothes. The host was too mature, Her heart was strong, her ability was strong, and she was at the peak of the king. As a system, he was relieved. Wei Wei Bai was a woman of her words. She said that she wouldn't flirt, so she wouldn't. When she came to listen to the chanting the next day, she sat on the scripture with a serious face. The young man sat on the chair and put his fingers on the table. His beautiful fingertips were only a few inches away from the little fairy. But she was expressionless, with her arms crossed in front of her chest. She listened to him seriously. Unlike in the past, she would run over and rub his fingers from time to time. Sometimes, it was too sticky. He even used the alms bowl to hold her down. Today, he had already placed the alms bowl on one side of the table. He planned to do what she did yesterday and hold it in place so that she could calm down for a few days. Last night, he sat on the futon and chanted scriptures the entire night. He also spent the whole night counting the prayer beads. He thought of her demonic frenzy, and then silently used all his strength to suppress the dark hell. She was afraid that the aura of the dark hell would transform into her appearance. To tempt him. In the past, he was confident that he could suppress the aura of darkness. After all, what was fake would always be fake. Last night, for the first time, he didn't allow any dark aura to appear. He seemed to be afraid of something. Love, hate, fear. He was born with the Buddha bone, so he was unfamiliar with these emotional fluctuations. Ever since he was young, he had always felt that the world was empty. Everything in the world is like water in his eyes. With a sweep, there was no trace left behind. But yesterday, when she was lying on top of him, her soft and fragrant body had broken the peaceful feeling he had for so many years. It was like a hurricane had swept past. He was at a loss for the entire night. He thought that she would still be as unforgiving as she was in the past. Ning Chen glanced at the little demoness. He realized that she was really serious and listening to the scriptures. Today's scripture class was very smooth, so he deliberately slowed down his speed of speech. /quick to read at https://www.sashu.com. Quick to read on your phone, https://sashu.com, quick, comma. Chapter 2959. The little demon also asked a few questions about the scriptures, and it could be seen that she was listening carefully. In the end, it took a long time. The sun was about to set. Ning Chen stopped the lecture and glanced at her indifferently. He opened his thin lips and asked hesitantly, "Is there anything else you don't understand?" Wei Wei Bai jumped up and patted her delicate lotus skirt. "Isn't it just the same old tune? It's to calm the mind." "I understand." Ning Chen's lips trembled, but he didn't say anything. The little demon was still walking around the scriptures and said, "You're right. I figured it out last night. I should learn from the old turtle. I should learn to be a holy object and live as long as the heavens and the earth." Ning Chen looked at her silently, and his fair face was a little stunned. Wei Wei Bai jumped off the table and landed lightly. Then she waved her hand, "Then I'll go and talk to the old turtle at the back of the mountain. After all, he's a senior." She didn't take many steps. Suddenly, she was picked up by someone. In front of her was the young man's enlarged face. His eyebrows were delicate, and the cinnabar color in his eyes was like flowing flames. It was unusually gorgeous. Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while before lowering his eyes to hide the emotions in his dark eyes. "It's too late today. The old turtle is asleep." The little demon smiled indifferently. "Since the old turtle is asleep, I'll go to sleep too. I'll come to your lecture tomorrow. If you have nothing to do, you should work hard to cultivate." Ning Chen's eyes were deep, and he didn't say anything. The little demon at his fingertips was already shaking, trying to break free from his strength. Okay, monk, I'm leaving. Let go of me. Ning Chen raised his eyes slightly. His eyes were a little blank, and there was a trace of helplessness. He seemed to feel that Wei Wei Bai was not clingy today. It was a little hard. But this was what he wanted. He wanted her to cultivate well and not cling to him. Wei Wei Bai was still struggling, but she found that Ning Chen walked to the bed and put her on the quilt. Wei Wei Bai looked up at him blankly. Her delicate little face was full of tension and confusion. Monk, what do you want to do? I didn't do anything today, and I made the most profound confession. I swear to study hard. Today, it was indeed the best day he had ever done. Ning Chen thought about it. He didn't do anything wrong. He was silent for a while and then he said softly, "You can sleep here." Bai Weiwei stared blankly, but she didn't appreciate his kindness. Instead, she giggled, "No need, monk, I'm sleeping." "Where are you going to sleep? After all, you have to guard your body like jade. How can I defile the place where you sleep?" Even the honest man felt that something was amiss. Ning Chen's eyes became a little obscure. After thinking for a while, he took out a mirror from his sleeve. It was the mirror he had confiscated earlier. The mirror became very small in his fingertips. Then, he handed over the small mirror. "That Liu Chen." Ning Chen hesitated and was about to take back the mirror. But he found that the demon rushed over and took the mirror away. Then she looked down at the mirror. "All right, since you're so sincere, I'll reluctantly accept it." Ning Chen's fingers were stiff in the air. Then he stretched out his hand and spread the bedding. Then he thought of something and put the futon under the bed. It was a clean place. He sat cross-legged on the futon with an indifferent expression and a calm tone. "You sleep on the bed. I will meditate and rest. The spiritual aura in the spiritual pool is too strong. It is not easy for you to cultivate. You can rest in this meditation room when you are tired. / to make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click on you can see it when you open the bookshelf next time. If you like." Chapter 2960. The little demoness didn't care about what he said at all. She was looking at herself in the mirror with her head lowered. Her response was very perfunctory. "Got it. Whatever." Ning Chen was relieved to see that she had returned to her original self. He thought that she had lost all her worldly desires. Thinking of this, he paused. Didn't he want her to be like this? How could he be happy that she was still evil? For the first time, Ning Chen didn't want to think about it. He pursed his lips and closed his eyes to recite the sutra. Suddenly, a hand, soft and fragrant, caressed his face. "Monk, do you want me?" she murmured softly. Ning Chen's eyelashes fluttered and he immediately opened his eyes, only to see that he had returned to the spiritual pool. In the sky full of lotus flowers, the girl's back was facing him. Her back was bare. She turned her head and smiled, charming all living things. She stretched out her fingertips as if she wanted to touch him. Ning Chen's face turned cold. He immediately waved his prayer beads and shattered the illusion. Sure enough, he was back in the Zen room. He slowly relaxed. However, he saw the little Wei Wei Bai lying on the bed and calling him with a puzzled expression, "Monk, what's wrong with you? You didn't respond. Did you fall asleep?" Ning Chen quietly stared at her for a while before confirming that it was real. He gently shook his head and was about to say something. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai frowning. "Monk, will your dark aura run out?" Ning Chen pursed his thin lips and nodded. "Occasionally, I will try my best to suppress it." The little demoness supported her chin with both hands and asked curiously, does your dark aura reflect your inner thoughts? Ning Chen's expression turned serious. Did she call out her name just now? She shouldn't have. He wasn't born yet. He was silent for a while before saying slowly, occasionally, it will reflect my inner thoughts, and then it will be magnified into an illusion. The little demoness nodded and then pointed behind him. Is that also an illusion of your dark aura? Ning Chen's pupils shrank. Behind. He immediately turned around and saw a beautiful figure sitting on the table. Her beautiful and smooth back and fair skin made the woman turn her head slightly, her lips curling into a mocking smile. Then, she said in a low voice, "Monk, the gap in your heart has become bigger. You can actually miss some of us when you destroy us." Ha ha ha. That woman's face was Wei Bai's. Ning Chen immediately came back to his senses. Just now, he was in a trance, shattering the illusion. However, he missed out on a few strands of dark energy. He let it escape outside. With a flick of Ning Chen's finger, the naked woman shattered. Then, he almost didn't dare to turn around and held his breath. Finally, he heard the question he didn't want to hear the most. "Monk, is your hallucination me without any clothes on?" The little fairy's voice was soft and innocent, as if she really didn't know anything. Ning Chen, he lowered his head nervously and did not explain anything. After all, that was the truth. The obsession in his heart had transformed into something. It was just that filthy. Suddenly, he heard Wei Bai say lazily, "Monk, I want to sleep, but my body is too small and the blanket is too big. It's not convenient for me to sleep. Can you unseal me and give me the Buddha beads?" Ning Chen had never thought of taking away her Buddha beads. He was just suppressing her for a while to prevent her from acting too recklessly. He didn't hesitate and threw the Buddha beads away. He didn't even turn around. He was afraid that Wei Bai would remember what he had imagined again. He meditated silently and chanted the heart-cleansing sutra to suppress the darkness in his heart. Suddenly, a pair of hands hugged his waist. The girl pressed her face against his shoulder and whispered, "Monk, instead of looking at such an ugly thing, why don't you look at me? I'm the real person." Ning Chen thought that she was really going to cultivate and suppress her temper. He didn't expect that after giving her the Buddha beads, she would still be so clingy. Ning Chen lowered his head silently. His fingers that were holding the Buddha beads were slightly pale. He was about to leave her. However, he found that his surroundings were clear. The dark energy around him was absorbed and purified by the girl behind him. Her breathing was a little difficult. She hugged his hand a little harder and her fingers were trembling. After purifying all the overflowing dark energy in one go, the girl let go of him. Her voice was indifferent. "Don't force yourself in the future. If you feel uncomfortable, just tell me. I'll help you." After saying that, she left and returned to the bed. Ning Chen looked down at the Buddha beads on his fingers. After a long time, he gently turned his head. However, he saw that the girl was already curled up. Her face was pale and she was hiding in the bedding. Her eyes were closed and she was sleeping quietly. She had used up too much energy and was sleeping soundly. She wasn't like her usual self at all, thinking of ways to disturb him. Ning Chen stared at her for a while. Then, he got up and walked to the bedside. He reached out his fair fingers and wanted to touch her. However, his fingertips stopped at the last moment. He hesitated for a while before pulling her blanket and covering her more tightly. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 60. Chapter 2961. The days of chanting were slow and leisurely. The little lotus fairy really stopped fooling around. Every day, she would sit obediently on his desk. Sometimes, the little girl would lie on his scripture book and read. Sometimes, she would lie on the book and recite the scriptures with her eyes closed. Every month, when he held a Dharma assembly, she would lie on his hand and go with him. The lotus flowers in the spiritual pond were always blooming. None of them were as pretty as the little lotus fairy. She would only hug the prayer beads he gave her at night and quietly absorb the power. Her clinginess disappeared after she lost control during the berserk period. She was much quieter now. Ning Chen glanced sideways and quietly sized her up. There were a few more candles in the meditation room, making it brighter. Wei Wei Bai's small body leaned against the prayer beads. Her white and tender fingers touched the prayer beads. She put her face on the prayer beads and squinted her eyes slightly. She was absorbing the power. Now, she could freely control her size. She seemed to know that she could charm people when she grew bigger. So most of the time, even if she could grow bigger, she would still maintain this small figure. Suddenly, she opened her eyes. Her eyes were clear and there was a golden glow in them. She slowly looked up, as if she sensed his peeping gaze. She looked at him with a softer gaze. "Monk, if you like to look at me, then look at me openly. Don't hide it. You asked me to chant the scriptures to clear my mind, but you're the one who's obsessed." Wei Wei Bai smiled. Ning Chen silently looked away. After a long silence, he said softly, "It's my fault for having too much obsession." He didn't deny it. But he didn't say in detail what obsession he had. Wei Wei Bai sat up with the prayer beads in her arms. "If there's too much dark energy, tell me. I'll help you purify it. You raised me so big. Isn't it because of my purifying power?" The monk valued her so much from the beginning. He probably felt that her purifying power was being used. Otherwise, he wouldn't ask her to chant scriptures every day. After all, she was stronger and her mind was purer. She had embarked on the path of biological cultivation. Then, her purifying power would only be stronger. She could help him even more. "You raised me to this age." Ning Chen's expression was calm. His fingers gently pinched the Buddha beads. He lowered his eyelashes and said in a faint voice, "Don't force yourself. You should focus on cultivation now." He could control himself. With such thoughts in mind, he suddenly felt something slowly creeping up his leg. He coldly lowered his head and saw the pale woman reveal a stunning and strange smile. She slowly opened her mouth, as if she was about to say something seductive. She looked at the face that looked like Wei Wei Bai. Ning Chen moved his finger. A Buddhist bead flew down from the string of beads. He quietly shattered the illusion. He watched as the illusion shattered into pieces and disappeared completely. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. Then, he looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai leaning on the edge of the table. She seemed to want to see what was going on. He was speechless for a moment. Then, he reached out his fingers and gently pressed her head, slowly pushing her back. "Nothing." His voice was calm. It was as if nothing had happened. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with both hands and leaned on the table. She revealed a smile. "Monk, if you feel uncomfortable anywhere, remember to tell me. I'll help you purify it." Ning Chen looked up and pursed his thin lips. Then, his voice softened a little. "You're cultivating now. You don't have to worry about me." Wei Wei Bai snorted softly with a childish nasal voice. Then, she obediently leaned on the scripture book and read the scriptures. Seeing that she didn't suspect anything, Ning Chen heaved a sigh of relief and began to count the beads. He counted only a few. Suddenly, she looked up in realization. Then, she smiled and said, "Monk, you're old enough. Sometimes, it's not because of obsession, but because of the body. After all, young people are full of vigor and vitality. They can't control it. Don't be mean. Ning Chin. The save button you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you like. Chapter 2962. Then, he finally understood the meaning of this sentence. His face turned slightly red. He took out a small wooden hammer and tapped her head lightly. Nonsense, cultivate properly. The little lotus fairy glared at him and began to read the scriptures again, ignoring him. Ning Chen looked at her silently for a while before lowering his eyes. Did he tap her head too hard? Was she angry again? At dinner time, there were a few plates of small pastries in the light meal. They were all very cute. The pastries were pink and red, light green and light green. They were all made with different ingredients. They were full of spiritual energy. It should be because they picked rare plants to have such an effect. These plates of pastries were placed in front of Wei Wei Bai. Ning Chen ate expressionlessly and didn't specifically ask her to eat. Wei Wei Bai also sat expressionlessly beside the big plate, holding a small rice ball and gnawing on it. The lotus fairy didn't need to eat, it was enough to eat spiritual energy. But she was still a human, she still had a desire to eat. So she never wronged herself. If the target ate, she would eat as well. But she turned a blind eye to the pastries that Ning Chen placed beside her. Ning Chen lowered his eyes dark, with a trace of inquiry. Why, didn't she eat? Didn't she like it very much? Or, did she not like it after a few days? This kind of thought lightly swept through his heart, but he restrained the urge to ask. He just casually reached out and pushed the plate closer to Wei Wei Bai. The little fairy looked up, a trace of doubt appearing on her beautiful face. Monk, didn't you want to eat this thing yourself? Ning Chen was silent for a while, then slowly looked at her. I don't eat this. Wei Wei Bai took a bite of the rice ball and said slowly, if you don't eat, why did you spend so much effort to pick the spiritual herbs? Ning Chen's fingers that were holding the chopsticks paused, his cold eyes staring at her for a while, then slowly said, my body is stiff, I went out to exercise. After Wei Wei Bai finished eating the small rice ball, she clapped her hands and took out a special small spoon. Then, she scooped up a spoonful of pastry and began to eat. She said as she ate, just say that you're cooking for me. Why are you so shy? You're starting to be dishonest too. You're the one who's talking nonsense, but you're the one who can't do it. You're the one who's blabbering nonsense. Ning Chen silently took out 2 pieces of earplugs and stuffed them into his ears. Today was another day of the little lotus fairy's nagging. Why was a plant spirit so talkative? Ning Chen found it strange and continued to eat. With the help of the mirror, Wei Wei Bai was no longer in a hurry to complete the mission. Before she went to bed, she would always take out the mirror and look at it again and again. Her face was too beautiful. The more he read, the more refreshed he felt. The world was beautiful, his mood was good, and his thoughts and morals had all improved. The system was sewing a pair of shoes for itself while chatting with the host. Little Biao is so pitiful. It goes to the mine every day to mine for alien minerals. When those foremen see that it can't do it, they even whip it. Sigh, it's really refreshing. Ha ha ha. The host was also holding the mirror. It sounds so pitiful. Its temper has improved a lot recently. It's not good to gloat. The system said, don't sympathize with it. It was promoted from a civilian system. These kinds of systems usually have a problem, which is that they're especially ruthless. That's why they can get rid of so many systems and get the mission. It's a fat job with power. It wasn't him who said that. It was just the missions. The system and the host would have to bribe it if they had some connections. Slash. Forward slash forward slash. Chapter 2963. Although the side quest could be rejected. But some special big quests could not be rejected. Some systems would bribe the host in advance to protect their performance. Otherwise, how could the side quest bear his debt, pay off half of it, and get the bank's debt repayment delay certificate? But half of it was the limit. He could only mine for the rest of his life to repay the daily bank interest. If he did not pay it back, he would be struck by lightning. Delete it. Wei Bai looked at her face. Even a saint could see it. She had such beauty and suddenly felt that the world was so beautiful and cute. She should also have a kind heart and give the side quest some verbal pity. Wei Bai, what a poor little thing. After all, mining is hard work. We are all commoners like you. Don't dislike each other. They were all poor commoners. Who was better than who? Her family's Tongzi could not even buy a house. He was so stingy when it came to eating snacks. Now that she had life points, it was right to give him more to buy food. But even if he was full, he still could not marry a female Tongzi without a house. The system was just about to popularize the side quest's heartless black-hearted heart, so that its pure host would not be deceived. Ding, random side quest activated. A familiar voice. Dear little baby, today is another day of loving you. I will miss you to death if I don't see you. Miss you to death. I still miss you to death. The words were the same, but the meaning was very different. But random quests were all small quests. So the system and the host were still making shoes and looking in the mirror. Host, please do your part as a goblin. Part. What part? Seducing people. The goblins of this plane like to eat people and harm people to strengthen their own growth. You have to be strong, goblin host. When Wei Bai heard this, her eyes turned cold and she immediately became vigilant. It did not feel like a small quest. As expected. Host, please absorb the essence of 100 people. Before the main quest of this plane is completed, complete the side quest together. Punishment, disfigurement of the face, disfigurement of the soul, the system's entire family and the host's entire family, including their ancestral graves, will be dug out and disfigured. In a distant alien planet, the side quest sends a wonderful blessing. Remark, I want your whole family to go to the Bridge of Helplessness to scare the other party. Reincarnate in an orderly manner and then be scared to death. After death, go to the Bridge of Helplessness again to scare the other party. Endless generations of ancestors and descendants, each generation scaring people to death. Wei Bai held the mirror. The system who was sewing the shoes was speechless. Then, Wei Bai touched her face and silently put down the mirror. The system looked at the little shoe in its hand and silently put down the needle. Wei Bai finally sighed, Tong Shou, you're right. What a vicious and merciless trash Tong Shou. Whipping it while it's mining is too easy on it. We should pour chili water into its butt. The system sighed faintly, I told you, that guy is not a good person. We don't have any deep grudges with it, and we're even friendly with it. How could it be so deranged to such an extent? The chili pepper water is too kind, we fed it molten iron to wake it up. The system and the host both showed a friendly and gloomy expression. To the distant side quest. To give it a wonderful blessing of being formatted every day and being fed molten iron every day. Wei Bai put down the mirror and stared blankly at a certain spot. She had already grown up. Lying in bed, there was a hint of melancholy on her white and tender face. Sitting by the bed, Ning Chen, who was sitting on the cattail hassock, faintly raised his eyes and looked at her for a while. Then, he asked softly, what's wrong? / next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2964. Wei Wei Bai turned her head and sized him up in a daze. Then, she hesitated and frowned. Monk, do you think that most of the demons are harming people? Ning Chen's expression was indifferent. Yes, most of them are. Because of the berserk period, the essence of humans is also what demons need. Many demons will choose to absorb essence to survive, or eat humans directly when they are hungry. Demons. Those who could grow big and become great demons were not good people. This was because a pure fairy would have to walk a very long path to cultivate. Even the old tortoise at the back of the mountain cultivated for 10,000 years before he could cultivate a divine ability. However, by eating humans, the Fae could obtain great benefits in just a few years and become powerful. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and leaned on the pillow, half of her face hidden under the blanket. After a long time, she said in a muffled voice, "Aren't good demons harming people?" Ning Chen's hand that was silently counting the prayer beads on his fingers paused. He raised his eyelashes slightly, revealing his dark eyes. His gaze was deep. It was even sharp. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were still pure and clear, without a trace of dark filth. Ning Chen stared at her for a long time before slowly looking away. Harming people means that one's mind is not firm. If one wants to solve everything, it will only lead to evil and not to the true path of cultivation. And human nature hides filth. If one is tainted with human essence, they can become powerful, but they will also become dirty. He said until here. Then, he sighed. Human nature hides evil, but it also hides good. I came from among humans, and I will also guard this path of humans. This is my path of cultivation, and also my way of purifying my heart. Wei Wei Bai frowned, as if she did not understand. Monk, don't you think that everything is illusory? Why do you protect people? He valued people so much. Could it be said that he saw nothing? Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled slightly, and his eyes were clear. Then, his voice lowered. Because I have yet to break away from the heavenly Tao, I still need to find a goal for my cultivation and guard this goal until I truly succeed in my cultivation. At that time, I will be able to truly see all things in the world without emotions. Wei Wei Bai blinked and then pursed her lips into a smile. Monk, I don't understand what you're saying. You need to protect the target before you can cultivate. Ning Chen lowered his head to look at the Buddhist prayer beads and replied faintly, "You can say that." Ning Chen. Suddenly, the young girl murmured softly. Her voice was so soft that it carried a hint of tenderness. Ning Chen stopped counting the Buddhist prayer beads and looked up in silence. However, he saw that the young girl was already lying on the edge of the bed. She rested her face on the arm that was lying horizontally on the bed. Her black hair was draped over the side of the bed, and her gentle face was full of smiles. She said lazily, "Don't the guardians feel bored? Why don't you protect me?" Ning Chen frowned, pursed his lips, and sighed indifferently, "Don't mess around. Go to sleep." Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out, her beautiful white fingers lightly touching his cheek. The young man's face was still indifferent, and his expression was even a little too cold. She narrowed her eyes, her gaze gentle. Her fingertips slowly touched his lips, chin, and even his Adam's apple. He was like an emotionless stone statue. He didn't avoid her touch, but he didn't respond either. Wei Wei Bai's fingers finally lifted his chin. She looked at the stunning cinnabar between the young man's eyebrows and his beautiful but cold thin lips. She said faintly, "Monk, you only need to guard a target to cultivate successfully. Why don't you choose me? Humans are so boring and vicious. They're not as cute as me." Chapter 2965. Speaking of this, she smiled gently. She was so beautiful that it stunned all living beings. She had an irresistible charm. Look at the world. Tens of thousands of people come and go, but no one accompanies you. I'm the only one who can accompany you. Ning Chen's eyes froze, and he stared at her motionlessly. It was as if he was moved by her for a moment. However, his cold and hard heart once again covered it. He reached out and clasped her fingers. He faintly exerted force, and he actually had the urge to break them. His fingertips paused. In the end, he just lowered his eyes and pursed his lips. He didn't say anything. The girl smiled and said, "Monk, don't you think that I'm much better to you than humans? Who would like a stinky monk? Only I like you." Her self-cultivation during this period of time made Ning Chen a little confused. He thought that she was no longer clingy. He thought that she had thought it through and wanted to cultivate. He didn't expect that. The sudden confession and temptation were even more terrifying than before. Terrifying. These two words faintly appeared in Ning Chen's heart. He felt that if he was careless, he would step into a beautiful trap that she had made up. He would be consigned to eternal damnation. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about the strength of his grip on her wrist. Instead, she used her nails to slowly scratch his skin. A gentle force. It was itchy and numb. Wei Wei Bai leaned forward and said in a gentle and sweet voice, "Ning Chen, can't you guard me? I'm not those stinky humans and stinky stones. If you give me 1 point, I'll give you 100 points. If you take 1 step forward to me, I can walk the rest of the way by myself." Ning Chen's eyes were still calm, but his thin lips trembled slightly. His breathing became heavier, and he finally said, "It's late. It's time to sleep." Wei Wei Bai was about to continue with her seduction. But she found that she had become small again. Then, a bowl slammed down. Outside the bowl, the young man's voice was as cold as ice. "It seems that you're still not clean. If you don't want to sleep, don't sleep. Tonight, listen to my chanting until you regain your calmness." As soon as he said this, sure enough, the sound of her jumping came from the bowl. "Smelly monk, can't I like you? So what if my 6 strands aren't clean? I didn't shave or cut my hair, so why do I have to be clean? Let me out, can't you see what I've done? I've been chanting scriptures for many days for you and worked hard to cultivate. You won't be able to get a wife like this, do you know that?" Ning Chen silently stared at the alms bowl. His voice was indifferent. "A monk doesn't need to marry a wife. If you treat me like this, I'm going to be angry and hurt. I'm going to blacken in front of you." Ning Chen sat on the cattail hassock with an expressionless face. Then, he took out the wooden fish and began to knock. He chanted sutras as he knocked. The little demoness was still roaring, "Knock your head. Knock your head. You're the one who forced me to eat and harm people in the future. You unromantic bald donkey, I'm so angry that I want to eat people." The sound of the wooden fish paused. The young man's voice was still calm. "If you eat people and harm others, I'll lock you in the demon-subduing tower. It's dark there, and there are many big demons who specialize in eating little demons." The little lotus fairy in the bowl was silent. After a long time, she asked softly, "Then will you go to the demon-subduing tower?" Ning Chen looked down expressionlessly and continued to knock on the wooden fish. After knocking for a while, he said softly, "Yes, I'll regularly clean up some big demons that have lost control." Cleaning up these demons required sufficient strength. Sometimes, when the strength was not enough, the demons would be captured and sealed in the demon-subduing tower. Then, when the strength was sufficient, the demons would be killed. Ning Chen did not make it too clear. After all, he was just scaring her, not really locking her up. Wei Wei Bai in the alms bowl immediately fell silent. It seemed like she was really frightened. Ning Chen was about to continue chanting sutras when he heard her calm voice from the alms bowl. Then, if I really harm people in the future, you can lock me in the demon-subduing tower. I'll try my best not to be eaten. At this point, she smiled. Then, I'll be able to see you. Ning Chen pursed his lips, his calm expression somewhat frozen. The little lotus fairy was still speaking slowly. So, monk, don't beat me to death in the future. Just lock me up. I still want to accompany you, always accompany you. Ning Chen turned his head to look at the alms bowl. He reached out and touched the alms bowl, but did not take it away. He just said indifferently. Cultivate well, no one will beat you to death. There was no fluctuation of emotions in his words, but his tone unconsciously softened a bit. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. Chapter 2966. The dark shadow spread upwards bit by bit. A pair of pale hands condensed from the darkness and stretched out from the black shadow. The strangely beautiful fingers slowly moved forward. The youth sat on the futon and frowned slightly. He seemed to have sensed something, and the cinnabar between his brows became brighter. Just as the fingers were about to touch his face. Suddenly, another hand grabbed the pair of hands from the darkness. Hey, do you know who he is? How dare you touch him? The girl's cold voice carried a hint of laziness. Only then did Ning Chen open his eyes. His eyes were cold. He saw that the pair of hands that were born from the darkness were tightly grabbed by the girl. As for the girl who had the power of purification, white fragments of light appeared on her fingertips. It was the light produced after purifying the dark energy. After Wei Wei Bai purified the hand that was about to harass the monk, she blew on her fingers and blew away the white fragments of light. The specks of light that fell to the ground were exceptionally beautiful. Wei Wei Bai turned around and saw Ning Chen staring at her quietly. She immediately smiled. Monk, have you found the demon here? The place they were now was not the 1,000 Yuan temple. It was a temple 10,000 miles away from the 1,000 Yuan temple. This temple no longer had a monk in charge. It was said that the incense here was originally good. But since 3 years ago, the pilgrims here began to disappear. In the end, no one dared to come here. And the temple gradually became bleak. Until it became such a dilapidated place. The monks and the abbot in the temple disappeared at some point. Perhaps it was because of demons, so they reported it to the 1,000 Yuan temple. The 1,000 Yuan temple had to deal with many things every day. Demons rose everywhere. Although Taoism helped to share the burden. But it was mainly the responsibility of Buddhism. Every time Ning Chen came out of seclusion, he would deal with the great demons and demons in the demon-subduing tower. The matters outside the temple were not so serious that they could not be dealt with. He would not come out. Just like the matter of this small temple now, it could be solved by other monks. But, there was a little demon by his side to cultivate. Ning Chen intercepted such a mission and brought out the little lotus fairy who liked to look at herself in the mirror instead of chanting scriptures every day. She also liked to have 6 impure senses. He slowly raised his eyes and looked at the roof beam of the ruined temple. Faint traces of blood could be seen on the beam. It seemed that something had dragged its prey up and eaten it, causing blood to drip down the beam. Old bloodstains. Not in the near future. Ning Chen faintly lowered his eyes. The temple still had the smell of incense accumulated over the years. This kind of place used to be flourishing with incense. It shouldn't have been so easily invaded by demons. If he was a great demon, he wouldn't have to be so secretive. He pondered for a moment and glanced sideways at Wei Wei Bai. She was sitting on a futon, bored. She was drawing on the ground with a wooden stick. Ning Chen glanced at him indifferently and his eyes froze. She was writing. Ning Chen. There were many Ning Chens. The young man watched for a while before slowly blinking his eyes. His mouth and tongue were a little dry. She seemed to have sensed his gaze and immediately used a branch to wipe away the words on the ground. Then she pretended as if nothing had happened and said, "Monk, can't you find out? Could it be a very powerful demon?" Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while before calmly shaking his head. "There's no demon aura. Maybe I can only detect it at night. Some demons' residual aura would only appear at night." Chapter 2967. After all, most demons came from the dirtiest and darkest places. Sunlight had a restraining effect on them. Most of their auras couldn't be seen under the sun. Wei Wei Bai supported her chin with both hands. The delicate girl pouted and muttered unhappily, "Monk, this place is so broken and dirty. Why didn't you send someone else here? Why did you come here yourself?" Ning Chen took out a small wooden hammer from his sleeve and hit the back of her head. Wei Wei Bai's head was shaken and she almost lost her senses. Ning Chen then calmly took back the wooden hammer. "Aren't other people people too? Why do you want other people and not us?" Wei Wei Bai covered her head with her hands and looked at him with tears in her eyes. Her clear eyes were full of tears that couldn't fall. Ning Chen's heart clenched when he saw this. He was just thinking if he was too harsh with his words. Then he heard Wei Wei Bai's choked voice and said happily, "Monk, we are so happy to hear you say that." Ning Chen, Wei Wei Bai touched her head and wiped her tears. "You can talk about other people, but you talk about me and you talk about us. Sure enough, we are the closest." Ning Chen, he was silent for a while before he quietly took back the wooden hammer. He couldn't understand why she was crying and laughing at the same time. "We are just us. Isn't it too much of a waste of words to say, you and me?" There was indeed something wrong with this demoness brain. The sun was setting in the west. The dilapidated temple was extremely quiet. Wei Wei Bai yawned tiredly. She said lazily, "Monk, I'm so bored." "Aren't you bored?" Ning Chen said calmly, "If you're bored, then recite scriptures." Wei Wei Bai asked, "Besides reciting scriptures, what else do you like?" Ning Chen seriously thought for a while before he said calmly, "Reciting scriptures is the best." Wei Wei Bai was finally defeated. She said softly, "But to me, you are the best." She said this somewhat helplessly. It couldn't be called joy, nor was it a trace of joy. It was a plain and casual sentence, but it was more like it was pulled out from the heart. Ning Chen quietly turned to look at her. However, he saw that the young girl still had her head lowered. Her long eyelashes were drooping, her skin was delicate, and her long hair was tied up with a ribbon. A beautiful flower bud was quietly blooming in her thick hair. Her appearance was too delicate and beautiful, but it carried a hint of sadness. For a moment, Ning Chen did not know how to respond. It seemed that no matter what he said, it was wrong. Not saying anything was even more wrong. In the end, he simply said, "Don't think too highly of me. It's not worth it." Wei Wei Bai immediately looked up and glared at him fiercely, "Stinky monk, wait until I put you down in the future. I won't stick to you anymore. I won't want you anymore. You will cry." Ning Chen was silent for a moment before calmly nodding. "I will wait for that day." Wei Wei Bai ground her teeth and snorted. Then, she turned around and crossed her arms, ignoring him. Ning Chen, who was used to being ignored by others, calmly continued to count the prayer beads and recite the scripture. Wei Wei Bai said impatiently, "What are you chanting for? It's so annoying. Stop chanting." Ning Chen ignored him and murmured softly. Wei Wei Bai said, "You are unreasonable." Ning Chen continued to recite the scripture. Wei Wei Bai said, "Monk, shut up. Otherwise, I will kiss you." Ning Chen paused and realized the meaning of this sentence. His face couldn't help but heat up slightly. Then, he finally fell silent. Finally, it was night time. Wei Wei Bai ignored Monk Ning for a while. The temple at night was gloomy. The broken window lattice, the withered leaves outside the door, and the spider silk in the temple was everywhere. There was a huge incense burner, full of burnt ashes, and it was very dusty. /T Chapter 2968. There was still nothing unusual in the temple. He couldn't see any signs of demons either. Ning Chen's fair wrist was wrapped around a floating prayer bead. His eyes were clear and he was not surprised. He knew what a demon without an aura was. But this time, he was here to train her. So Ning Chen said in a low voice, "Do you see anything wrong with this temple?" Wei Wei Bai snorted and said with her back to him, "You're the only one who's wrong. You're the most wrong." Ning Chen said indifferently, "What's wrong with me?" Could it be that she felt that there was a demon behind him? Wei Wei Bai said, "You're ignoring me, of course there's something wrong." Ning Chen, then he finally felt helpless. "You're here to train your ability. Don't be so willful like a child." He suddenly felt that dealing with those big demons was not as tiring as bringing her along. He kind of understood how it felt to raise a child. It was too difficult. He held a prayer bead in his hand. Suddenly, he raised his hand and threw the prayer bead out. It fell accurately into the incense burner. He slowly got up from the futon, reached out and patted the creases on his white monk robe, then looked up at the incense burner. "There's nothing wrong with the temple. There's no evil aura, but there are bloodstains everywhere." It was really everywhere. Although these bloodstains were obvious, they had been cleaned up. But the remaining traces showed how much blood had splashed. Not only was there blood on the beam, but there was also blood on the ground and under the table. Even the Buddha statue was covered in blood. Ning Chen's gaze fell on the incense burner. "You've been locked up by me. You can't escape." The pilgrims and the Buddhist disciples in the temple, a total of 63 people, died because of your greed. The incense offerings did not nurture your spirituality, but nurtured evil. Wei Wei Bai looked up strangely and glanced at the incense burner. "Monk, why are you talking to yourself in front of the incense burner? Are you so bored that you've gone crazy?" Ning Chen's originally cold gaze landed on her body, bringing with it a hint of helplessness and gentleness. Then, he stretched out his hand, grabbed her collar, and lifted her up lightly from the ground. "Learn well." After saying that, he moved his fingertips. Inside the incense burner, the light of the Buddhist prayer beads overflowed. Within the golden halo, a shriek rang out. He was filled with resentment. "Stinky monk, why are you treating me like this? Let me out." Wei Wei Bai saw a ferocious monster's face appear on the previously silent incense burner. It kept roaring on the incense burner, popping out and being dragged back in. "I am blessed with good deeds. You can't treat me like this." Ning Chen's face was calm, but his eyes were cold. He said in a low voice, "Merits. Is it the merit of eating humans?" The incense burner's voice was sharp. "I'm just following my desires and cultivating myself. What's wrong with eating humans? Humans eat all living things and harm all living things. What they pray for every day is not just lust. They want money, wealth, sex, and even curse others to die. Humans worship me, but my furnace is full of evil thoughts. It's all humans' fault. Ning Chen remained indifferent. If this bit of twisted logic could move him. He had long been devoured by his own darkness. He took a step back and said to Wei Wei Bai, who was watching the show, "Purify it." Wei Wei Bai looked at the struggling ugly face on the incense burner and immediately refused. "It's so ugly. You want me to touch it?" Ning Chen observed the incense burner again. Then he turned back and said seriously, "It's not that ugly. Don't slander it. Go, /" Chapter 2969. Wei Wei Bai was anxious. "Monk, if this isn't considered ugly, then wouldn't I be the #1 beauty in the world? Where are your eyes?" Ning Chen pondered for a moment before nodding slowly. "Yes, you are the #1 beauty, so go and purify it." These honest words sounded too good to be true. Wei Wei Bai immediately went to purify it happily. Seeing her so happy, Ning Chen suddenly thought of a way to stop her from being angry. "Praise her, beauty." Wei Wei Bai took out a handkerchief and wrapped her fingers. Then, she touched the incense burner lightly and began to purify it. The demon's face on the incense burner was abnormally terrifying. It kept howling. "What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? What's wrong with eating humans? I've painstakingly stood here and endured the evil thoughts of humans for 100 years. Why can't I eat them back? Do you know how painful it is for me? Stupid monk, you're so hypocritical. What Buddha is merciful? Merciful my ass. You only attacked us demons for your own merit." It laughed sinisterly. "What's the difference between you and me? It's just that our paths are different. That's why you see us as thorns in your flesh." Ning Chen looked at it silently, unmoved. Then, he looked at Wei Wei Bai. He realized that she was not affected at all. Although her aptitude was poor, her temperament was good. After all, the words of demons were the easiest to bewitch people. Many people with weak wills would be easily lured away. The evil intentions on the incense burner were getting lesser and lesser. It was anxious and immediately turned to lure Wei Wei Bai. "You're also a demon. You're on the same side as me. What's in it for you to help this monk? He'll kill you sooner or later." When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she immediately exploded. "Who's on the same side as an ugly monster like you? You're so ugly. Why don't you just kill yourself? You still have the face to talk to me. Are you worthy? Bah, you're not worthy." The incense burner, these words were so vicious that it broke the demon's heart. It said blankly, "The monk wants to kill you." Damn, this was the main point. Wei Wei Bai increased the intensity of the purification. "So what if he kills me? I'm happy to do so. Who asked me to lust after his beauty? Even if I die under a peony, I'll still be a romantic ghost. If I can get close to her one day, I'll give up my life." The incense burner, it was ugly and shameless. How could she make it sound so righteous when she coveted beauty? She was obviously even more shameless than it. The incense burner finally struggled with all its might. It shook the incense burner and scattered the ashes. Wei Wei Bai's face was expressionless as she plucked a small leaf from her ear with one hand. The small leaf grew bigger and turned into a large lotus leaf. She held the pole of the lotus leaf and used it as an umbrella to block the ashes. Then, he used all his strength to stuff all the purifying light into the incense burner. The malicious black gas and the ferocious demonic face dissipated in an instant. Bit by bit, they turned into white light fragments. The young girl stood in the shattered light, supporting herself with a lotus leaf, slender and elegant. She waved her hand and said with disdain, I need to wash my hands clean to purify an ugly monster. Monk, I say, can you let me purify a beautiful demon next time, Wei Bai, who sensed that something was wrong, turned around. She saw Ning Chen standing in front of her. The beautiful young man's expression was unusually cold. The cinnabar between his eyebrows was gorgeous and demonic. His thin lips were lightly pursed. There was a deep and unfathomable treachery in his dark eyes. After staring at her for a while, he slowly reached out and grabbed her neck. Behind him, a dark shadow was already pressing against his back. The shadow silently whispered in his ear, words that only he could understand. Hell is getting bigger and bigger. Do you know why? There are cracks in your heart. You have desires. You have something to cling to. You're finished, Ning Chen. / Chapter 2970. You're finished. Ning Chen. Normally, the evil thoughts in the ashes were nothing to him. But he forgot that this did not belong to the demons of the incense burner, but the malice of humans. The incense burner carried the desires of humans. The ashes were filled with the desires of humans. And these were the favorite food of the dark hell in his heart. Without him noticing, the darkness ran out again. It even brought out the darkest thoughts in his heart. Kill the little lotus fairy. Because she was the most important reason for the crack in his heart. No matter how much he purified, his heart would have desires and attachments. Then they were all nourishment. It would strengthen this hell to the point where he could not suppress it. A person with Buddha's bone should be firm to the point that no evil could invade. That was why he could be attached to so much darkness and not be affected. But now, he had a little fondness for her. This fondness made him feel a sense of crisis. His fingertips, with a slight force, could cut off her neck with the sharp light of Buddha. Ning Chen's eyes were dark and strange. The shadow behind him was lying on his back, constantly bewitching him silently. Kill her, kill her, kill her, you can also achieve your goal. What you want is her purifying power. Even if she succeeds in cultivation and becomes a purifying holy object, she may not sacrifice herself to purify you. So, killing her and turning her into a lifeless object is the most right thing to do. Countless words were transmitted into his ears from the shadow. Complicated and vast evil thoughts kept eroding his rationality. The girl in front of him seemed to have noticed something. She raised her head slightly and did not struggle. She just stared at him in confusion. His indifferent face was reflected in her beautiful eyes. As if she had finally confirmed something, she asked softly, "Monk, do you want to kill me?" The killing intent in his eyes was too obvious. Ning Chen looked at her indifferently, as if he was looking at the incense burner just now. Wei Bai was not afraid. Instead, she walked forward slowly. His fingers did not exert force. Instead, he tried his best to relax and tremble. She walked in front of him and touched his face with both hands. The beautiful young man had fair and slender skin. His fingertips felt very good as they slid across his skin. She smiled, her eyes curved into crescents. So in your evil thoughts, is there a desire to kill me? Is it because I annoy you every day, so you hate me? Do you hate me that much, monk? Ning Chen's eyelashes trembled. He wanted to say that he didn't hate him. But her lips seemed to be sealed. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the shadow grew in size and pressed down on him until he couldn't breathe. The girl in front of him sighed faintly. You can kill me, but I have to pay a price. Otherwise, wouldn't I be too useless? I won't be able to get any benefits from being killed by you. Wei Bai said as she reached out to undo his clothes. He didn't dare to move. A trace of bloody red appeared in his dark eyes. Wei Wei Bai had never seen such a terrifying expression on his stone face. She coquettishly reached out to caress his face, kissed his lips, and then moved downwards. In the end, she hugged him and rested her face on his unbuttoned chest, listening to his intense heartbeat. She sighed softly, exceptionally gentle and charming. "Monk, the feeling of hugging you is really good. I'm taking advantage of you, but even if you kill me 10,000 times, I'll still seduce you and make you lust for me. Resenting my persistence is also a kind of feeling." Speaking to hear. She smiled sweetly. "I'm not picky. I want all kinds of feelings." Chapter 2971. After saying that, she rubbed the skin on his chest and squinted her eyes in satisfaction. "Monk, you're really delicious." The girl's face was incomparably soft, and her body was full of fragrance. Lying on his chest, her chaotic breath was even more irresistible than the black shadow. Ning Chen's fingers trembled. Just as he was about to harden his heart and use the blood in his heart to control the black shadow. However, he saw the girl who was seductive to the bone suddenly raise her head. Her eyes were fierce, and she smiled coldly. Caught it. When she hugged him, her fingers actually grabbed the black shadow. The black shadow was illusory. Normal people couldn't catch it, but she had the power to purify it. She could easily catch anything with malicious intentions. However, the black shadow was cunning. If she didn't deliberately hug him, the black shadow hid in another place. It was difficult for her to catch it. The black shadow struggled desperately in her hands, but it couldn't resist Wei Wei Bai. She gritted her teeth and used all her power, including the power of the prayer beads that Ning Qin gave her in her sleeve to purify it. The black shadow became fainter and fainter. Her face turned pale. If the prayer beads absorbed too much, it wouldn't do her any good. Finally, the black shadow disappeared. She heaved a sigh of relief and wrapped her arms around his neck. She tiptoed and rubbed his face. "Okay, you're really worrisome. Next time, let me know in advance. Don't suddenly erupt." Several times, the dark aura overflowed. It was all sudden. It was difficult for her to deal with it. Then, she suddenly let go. Her body fell backward softly, and her fingers slipped from his neck. Her body also became smaller and smaller as she fell. Ning Chen was shocked and hurriedly raised his hand. She fell into his palm and became a small thing. She was pale and weak. She curled up into a ball, and the flower buds on her head drooped weakly. Ning Chen felt that his breath was a little chaotic, and his chest was so tight that he couldn't breathe. His voice was low. "You know that in my obsession, I want to kill you. Why didn't you escape?" Wei Wei Bai lifted her heavy eyelids and looked at him for a while before sneering, "You're really funny. How can I have a night with you after escaping? If you want to kill me in the future, take off your clothes for me to see. I'm willing to die in your hands. You're much more important than death." With that, she finally closed her eyes and fainted. Ning Chen looked at her quietly and then slowly walked out. A cold wind blew past the dilapidated temple. It was drizzling outside, so he quickly raised his sleeve to cover her. The rain fell on his body, and under his feet, besides the rain, there was also a black shadow. Although she had been purified. But she aroused his desires again. The black shadow that had disappeared reappeared. He lowered his head to look at the shadow. Finally, he used a drop of his heart's blood from his Buddha beads to fall into the shadow. The black shadow temporarily disappeared and was completely suppressed. Ning Chen's primordial qi was greatly damaged, and his face paled. He didn't say anything. He continued to slowly release golden energy from his palm to envelop her and help her recover. He heard the whisper again. Although the black shadow was suppressed, the black shadow could still mutter silently in its heart. The words were as cold as a snake, and there was a gloating laughter mixed in it. You're finished. Ning-chin. You're in love. Ning-chin. The young man slowly blinked. Seeing a few drops of rain fall beside her, he hurriedly covered his sleeves more tightly. A heart that was not moved by emotion or desire. Finally, it was tainted with the smell of smoke and fire. He thought of what the girl said when she hugged him, and couldn't help but smile. I'm more important than death. He asked in a low voice, but it seemed like he was talking to himself. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. He thought that he was indeed in love. Chapter 2972. Wei Wei Bai had spent a lot of effort to purify this time. She hugged the prayer beads, and the flower bud on her head drooped weakly. Ning Chen reached out and gently touched her head. His voice was calm. You will recover. Don't use your power for the time being. Take care of yourself. She stretched out her small hands and hugged the round prayer beads. She rested her face on the prayer beads and looked at Ning Chen blankly. Monk, what if you feel uncomfortable? Ning Chen's expression froze before he said softly, I'll take a bath in the spiritual pool to suppress the growth of the dark aura. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Without me, the dark aura in your body can't be much by relying on the spiritual pool. It was indeed the spiritual pool. It only washed away a little of the dark aura. It was more about guarding the heart. It was not about eliminating the desire of darkness. He did not continue this topic. Instead, he took out a small plate of pastries and carefully pinched a small spoon with his fingertips. He scooped a spoonful of pastries and handed it to her. Eat more and you'll grow up, he said expressionlessly. His tone was a little stiff. It seemed that he rarely cared so much about others. Wei Wei Bai looked up lazily, then opened her mouth. With a howl, she put the pastry into her mouth. Ning Chen silently began to feed her. It was as if he was feeding a small pet. This was a very novel feeling. If he did not suppress the growth of his emotions, he actually felt that he was raising her like this. It was a very happy and satisfying thing. After Ning Chen fed her some pastries. Then he reached out and gently rubbed her hair. Don't absorb too much. Your body is very weak now and can't bear too much power. Return to the spiritual pool to nourish yourself. Wei Wei Bai shook her head weakly. She hugged the prayer beads and did not let go. I don't want to. I won't be able to see you when I go back. I won't go. Ning Chen looked at her indifferently for a while before he sighed helplessly. Then, he lifted her up and walked out. He walked to the surface of the water and put her in. Then he sat on a lotus leaf and meditated. Okay, I'm here. Wei Wei Bai's small body automatically turned into a lotus and returned to the spiritual pool. This was how she absorbed energy the fastest. She moved the plate, then tilted the stem and rested it on his lap. Monk, I'm going to sleep. Don't leave me behind. Ning Chen reached out and gently stroked her petals. The young man's calm face, in the hazy fog, was strangely beautiful. His voice was calm but gentle. Sleep, I won't leave. The little lotus nodded and slowly calmed down. Soon, the lotus lost its usual spirit and vitality. When she subdued the incense burner, she used 70 to 80% of her strength. To suppress his dark energy, she overdrew her own life. Ning Chen gently placed his finger on her petals, and his eyes finally revealed traces of hidden warmth. Suddenly, his fingertips paused as he saw a dark aura emerge from the spirit pool. The aura condensed into the shape of a young girl. She was in the water, smiling sweetly as if she was seducing him. Ningchen glanced at him indifferently and then lowered his head to look at the little lotus. As for the young girl in the spiritual pool, she was also crushed by the Buddhist beads. Even the spiritual pond had been contaminated by his desires. Ningchen knew that he couldn't fall in love. Once a human's feelings were stirred up, then it was endless persistence and greed. He had already started to be greedy. He wanted to keep her by his side. Even, to have a sense of manliness. The young girl just now was what he had been thinking about. Last time in the spiritual pool, her wild temptation had been hidden in his heart. Chapter 2973. Every time he thought about it, he couldn't suppress her seductive charm in the spirit pool. That led to her shadow appearing in the dark hell, and it was the shadow of desire. Ning Chen's fingers gently touched her petals. He silently suppressed this terrible desire. In the spirit pool, a young man with a pure face hugging a beautiful lotus, an exceptionally beautiful scene. Around them, the fog in the spirit pool was slowly turning black. It was unusually strange and evil. Wei Wei Bai had to recuperate for almost a month before she could grow bigger. During this time, the young man didn't lose control. That huge black shadow also seemed to have disappeared. The system observed for a long time before saying, "His desire has deepened, the black shadow has become bigger, but it is suppressed by the male lead." This suppression. Which day would it erupt? Even the host couldn't suppress it. After all, compared to the host's three-legged cat purification power, the darkness in the male lead's heart was really a hell. Wei Wei Bai lay on the bed, holding the prayer beads with a relaxed expression. Let him be dark. How can there be feelings if he doesn't have feelings? If I don't have feelings, there won't be favorability. I'm going to eat him. If he doesn't have feelings, what if he directly destroys me? What was this thing called feelings? Was it beautiful? A little. But it was more of possession, persistence, madness, and desire. These were not good words. And these were what true feelings were like. When a monk was moved, his desire would only grow bigger. And this thing called desire was the nourishment that nourished his hell. The prayer beads in Wei Wei Bai's hand emitted a beautiful light. She lazily turned over, looked at the prayer beads and said, "Ning Chin hides a hell in his heart. It's very difficult to make him go crazy." Because he couldn't go crazy. Once a crack appeared, the consequences would be more terrible than anyone else. So this kind of person's self-control was strong to an unimaginable extent. She narrowed her eyes slightly and said slowly, "With my beauty, he can resist not touching me. His perseverance is top-notch." System, the host would never admit that his strategy was good. Anyway, the strategy was successful because he coveted her beauty. Ning Chen walked in and saw the little lotus fairy lazily lying on the bed. Her bare feet peeked out from under her skirt. Her delicate ankles were exceptionally beautiful. Her collar was a little messy, revealing her delicate collarbone. Her fair skin was faintly discernible. Ning Chen quietly stared at him for a while before silently moving his eyes away. He turned around to get the scriptures and sat on the futon. Listen well to today's lesson. I'm going out tomorrow, so you can recite the scriptures after I leave. His voice was slightly hoarse, but his expression was still incomparably indifferent. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she immediately turned over and lay on her stomach beside the bed. Her beautiful eyes showed traces of blank emotions. "Where are you going?" "Monk, why didn't you bring me along?" Ning Chen flipped open the scripture and said calmly, "The Taoist sect has invited me to attend a Dharma assembly. I will be back in a few days. The people there are not friendly to demons, so don't go." After all, she was a demoness who had failed in her cultivation. The Taoist aura was very unfriendly to demons. Wei Wei Bai said sweetly, you will be gone for so long. What should I do if I miss you? Ning Chen did not think about this problem. He pondered for a while and answered seriously, just recite the scriptures if you miss me. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Chen felt that the atmosphere was a little quiet. Did he say something wrong again? However, he saw the girl lazily turn over and then lay on the bed casually and said, "The days when I miss you are too hard. Why don't you leave me some souvenirs, so that I can have a place to place my longing?" Ning Chen lowered his eyelashes slightly, as if thinking about what could be a souvenir. However, he heard the girl say with a smile, "Why don't you have a one-night stand and leave a child for me?" Comma. Chapter 2974. Ning Chen raised his chin slightly, and his cold eyes fell on the girl indifferently. She was still smiling, as if she didn't think she was joking. Ning Chen thought for a moment before saying, "The child of a demon and a human will be deformed." Wei Wei Bai's smile froze. Ning Chen felt that it was necessary to teach her this. When a spider demon and a human have a child, they will give birth to a child that can spit silk. When a pumpkin demon and a human have a child, it will be a big pumpkin with 4 legs. When a rock demon and a human have a child, that child will be like a rock and won't want to move. Wei Wei Bai reached out and silently covered her ears. This was the first time she felt seductive, and it was extremely painful. What was the child of a lotus demon and a monk like? A child with blooming flowers on top of its head knocking on a wooden fish and chanting scriptures? It seemed to be cuter than a pumpkin child and a rock child. After teaching Wei Wei Bai, Ning Chen let out a sigh of relief. Then he said, "Okay, continue chanting scriptures." Wei Wei Bai continued to cover her ears with a hopeless expression. Stop chanting, this monk's true love was chanting scriptures. How could she not be able to defeat Jing Gwen after such a long time? Because he said that he would be away for a few days, the monk was afraid that she wouldn't hear enough scriptures, so he chanted scriptures the whole night. In the end, she pulled the quilt and fell asleep. Let him chant it himself. Chant it to your heart's content and live with the scriptures, you damn bald donkey. When Wei Wei Bai woke up and yawned sleepily, she saw a small bag beside her pillow. She opened the bag and took a look. More than a dozen red beans rolled out. Wei Wei Bai looked at it silently for a while before stuffing the red beans back one by one. "I hope you can pick more, this is the most yearning thing." Red beans meant lovesickness. She asked for the favorability. It rose to 75. It seemed that the monk was still too shy. He didn't even dare to give her a little thing that symbolized yearning. Wei Wei Bai looked up at the progress bar. It was clearly written that the completion rate was 0. The number 100 was written on it. It represented 100 people. The favorability rating was already at 75, but she hadn't absorbed anyone's essence yet. Furthermore, the method of absorbing essence chi was to ensure that the other party was completely dead. Only then would one be considered a person. Wei Wei Bai felt that she really wanted to delay such a heartless mission. While the monk was away, it would be best to absorb a few. Otherwise, once the favorability level was maxed out, they would probably be sent to the next generation to scare people to death. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and still felt that this mission was not appropriate. She asked the system, "I feel that this mission is too difficult. Can't I request to change it?" The system said earnestly, "I know you can't get over it. After all, killing is a difficult choice. How about this, I'll choose some villains for you to kill. Don't you feel better when you think about it?" Wei Wei Bai said, "That's not the point. The point is, when you absorb the essence, will you absorb the other party's ugly genes?" System, Wei Wei Bai frowned, "I can't absorb the essence directly. Is there any other way to collect the essence?" After all, the main point of the mission is not for me to absorb the essence into my body. As long as the action of absorbing the essence is completed, it will be fine. System, the host is still good at grasping the main point. Then he silently flipped through the information. In theory, it's fine. I'll buy you a simplified version of the essence gathering box. When the time comes, you'll see a flower of essence blooming on each person's head. Just reach out and pluck it and put it into the box, // next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like. Chapter 2975. Wei Wei Bai quickly nodded, then lazily continued to turn over. Okay, I'll try it on next time. The system looked at its lazy host. It also picked up the small shoes and began to try them on. If they didn't fit, it had to be changed. After all, if the shoes didn't fit, he wouldn't be able to run fast while carrying her. Wei Wei Bai didn't expect that the essence box could be used so soon. She estimated the time when Ning Qin would return and planned to give him a surprise. So she ran out of the temple in advance, planning to look for him on the road. In the end, in the forest at the foot of the mountain, she met a pale-faced scholar blocking her way. His face was sallow, holding a scholar's fan. He smiled and said, "Yo, little girl, where are you going? I'll send you on your way." Wei Wei Bai looked up. There was a black flower on his head. The system flipped through the information. Passerby cannon fodder armor, a bandit who kills people like flies, a ruthless flower thief. His bad habit is to rape women first and then kill them. Who knows how many women have died in his hands? This scholarly bandit was quite good at martial arts. His fingers were just about to reach out and grab this extremely beautiful girl. But he saw Wei Wei Bai reach out and grab his head expressionlessly, as if she was grabbing some air. Then she jumped away and looked at him coldly. The bandit revealed a sinister smile. Just as he was about to rush over to grab her, he found that his body had withered. Then he collapsed with a bang, turning into a withered corpse. Wei Wei Bai quickly threw the black flower into a box. She still got some of its smell. She quickly clapped her hands and said in disdain, "It's too dirty." The side mission also increased by 1 point. There were still 99 people left. Wei Wei Bai didn't care about this episode. She turned around and ran forward happily. From afar, she really saw Ning Chen's robe floating in the air. She quickly shouted, "Monk Ning, damn bald donkey, I'm here." The youth in the robe looked down. He saw the little lotus spirit jumping and chasing after him. Ning Chen, then, he showed a helpless expression, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl into a smile. The Dharma robe fell to the ground. He was about to reach out and grab her. The delicate girl had already reached out and hugged his neck. Her entire body leaned over and pressed against him. "Monk, I miss you so much." "Do you miss me?" Ning Chen's breath caught in his throat. He could only smell the girl's fragrance, which made his mind go blank for a moment. He gently raised his hand and placed it on her back, but he didn't dare to hug her back. Wei Wei Bai rubbed against him in satisfaction and said, "Monk, I've used my spiritual energy to nourish your lovesickness bean into a flower. Look." She left him and took out from her sleeve a large handful of leafy yellow flowers with green pods on them. It was a plant that grew after the red beans sprouted. She smiled and said, "You've been away from me for too long. My yearning has blossomed and I've given birth to another child." Ning Chen's eyelashes drooped slightly as she quietly stared at the handful of pods and yellow flowers in her hand. There were also fresh red beans in the pod. The red beans that he had given her had given birth to more red beans. Ning Chen once again looked up, his eyes becoming warm and gentle. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 78. He reached out and took the bean sprouts that she had ripened with her spiritual energy. His fingertips touched the soft leaves and flowers. The fresh smell was exceptionally pleasant. Just as he was about to say something, his eyelashes suddenly trembled and his brows slightly furrowed. Her body had the aura of a human's essence. Wei Wei Bai saw him take the red bean sprouts and immediately hugged him lazily. "Monk, I've run too far and my feet are tired. Carry me." Ning Chen was silent for a moment before he carried her up with one hand and placed her on the Dharma robe. He was silent for a moment. When he looked up again, there was already nothing strange about him. "And let's go back. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 2976. After Ning Chen returned, he took out the tranquil heart lamp that he had gotten from the Taoists. This lamp had many effects. The most important effect was to calm the heart and calm the qi. It was also one of the Dharma treasures to suppress the dark aura. The little lotus spirit needed more time and more essence to cultivate herself, instead of wasting her strength and stagnating. Wei Wei Bai sat on the table and looked at the lamp curiously. She reached out and touched the cluster of white fireworks. It was not hot. Instead, it was very cold. Ning Chen did not stop her. Instead, he took out a brush, dipped it in the fireworks, and began to draw talismans. This was a Taoist skill. He had learned some. After drawing the Taoist talisman, he rolled it up and tied it with a red rope before hanging it around Wei Wei Bai's neck. This talisman can help you calm your heart. Cultivators are most afraid of having an unstable heart. Wei Wei Bai reached out and picked up the talisman. She said with a smile, "Red beans represent longing. What does the talisman represent?" She thought that Ning Chen would not answer. However, she saw him turn around slightly and take the scriptures. His voice was calm. Worry. He was worried that something would happen to her, so he specially drew the talisman. Moreover, he would rather use the more powerful Taoist talisman than the Buddhist one. Because Taoists were indeed more powerful in terms of calming the heart. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then, she suddenly reached out and hugged him happily. "Monk, I'm so happy to hear you say that." As she spoke, she hugged him and rubbed against him. Ning Chen's breathing paused. He reached out and grabbed her collar, placing her on the table. "All right, stop fooling around. After so many days, it's time to start chanting the scriptures." After saying that, he ignored her and began to flip through the scriptures. However, the tip of his ears was slightly hot. It was just that it was not obvious, so it was hard to tell. Wei Wei Bai chanted the scriptures for more than 10 days. In the past 10 days, she tried her best to flirt with him, but his favorability didn't move much. Finally, one day, while he was meditating and sleeping on the futon, she stole a kiss on him. She let him use the alms bowl for an entire night. Only 1 point of favorability was deducted. 79. The old turtle's favorability slowly increased. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the side quest again. She was no longer anxious. After all, he was still 99 points away from completing the side mission. If the main mission was completed, the side mission would be considered a failure. The main storyline was 79. Side Mission 1. During this period of time, he had to focus on completing the side quests. Wei Wei Bai was lying on the lotus. The monk had gone to hold a Dharma assembly, so she stayed in the spiritual pool to recuperate. Have there been any bad guys recently? If he absorbed the essence of a good person, it would be harder for him to clear his name in the future. Therefore, the target was definitely an evil person. The system flipped through the list. Yes, it's the lair of that infamous bandit from last time. They're in cahoots, and all of them have committed countless crimes. None of them are good people, and they wreak havoc everywhere. You killed that scholar, and the bandits who were with him are looking for the murderer to take revenge. Wei Wei Bai sat up and supported her chin with her hands. Her eyes were dark. Oh, they want to take revenge on me. They are so vicious. The system said, basically, they've done all kinds of evil things. When the horse bandits massacred the village, they didn't even spare the old, the weak, the women, and the disabled. Wherever they went, they killed, burned, and robbed. Wei Wei Bai said, they're so vicious. Does the monk know? Why didn't he stop them? The system said, the male protagonist cultivates the path of humanity and follows nature. He feels that there's both good and evil in human nature, so he shouldn't interfere too much. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Monk Ning is actually quite cold. For the sake of his path, he's really cold to all living things. All living things rotate. Regardless of good or evil. He just had to let people live on their own. Quick, you'll see it the next time you open the bookshelf. If you liked, comma. Chapter 2977. Wei Wei Bai said again, Monk Ning doesn't care if humans kill each other, but he cares if demons eat humans. After all, he killed big demons and great demons. These were all nourished by humans. The system studied the data for a while before saying, yes, because demons eating humans will cause a devastating blow, it is not natural. And the small fights between humans will not destroy themselves no matter what, so there is no need to care. It was like how many ants died in a chaotic battle. It would not cause the extinction of ants. But if it was an external attack, such as rain or fire, the ant nest would be finished. In Ning Chen's eyes, the attacks of demons were rain and fire. He definitely needed to intervene. So if Wei Wei Bai ate humans, it would definitely be one of his achievements. It seems that before the mission is completed, I must not expose myself. I feel that the way Monk Ning looked at me after I came back last time was not right. I have to be careful. Although Ning Chen was habitually expressionless. But she just happened to be observing him. Sometimes, the way he looked at her was a little cold. Wei Wei Bai hoped that she did not expose herself. She took advantage of Ning Chen's Dharma assembly and successfully found the bandits' lair under the guidance of the system. Most of the bandits had gone out to rob. Only a dozen or so guards were left. She, a delicate girl who was so beautiful that people couldn't look away, suddenly appeared outside the bandits' lair. How could the bandits not be tempted? When they saw her, they were like wolves seeing fresh meat and immediately rushed out to grab her. But they didn't expect that the moment the dozen or so people came over, before they could reach out. The girl in front of them had already gently raised her hand and seemed to have plucked something in the air. Their movements collapsed and turned into shriveled corpses. Wei Wei Bai counted. There were 12 black-hearted essence. The more vicious a person was, the darker their essence. These essence were so dark that it made people sick. So Wei Wei Bai immediately went to wash her hands. She was such a cute and kind little fairy. These people's essence was not worthy of touching her hands. Next time, she would make a glove and pluck these essence every day. She didn't know if it would make her fingers turn black. The first requirement of a beauty was to be fair. If her skin was darker, she would not be beautiful. After Wei Wei Bai washed her hands, she hurried back to the temple. Just as she returned to the spiritual pool, she saw Ning Chen standing quietly on the long bridge. The beautiful young man quietly stood in the hazy fog. The cinnabar between his eyebrows was still gorgeous. His thin red lips were pursed lightly, and his eyes were incomparably clear. Wei Wei Bai immediately waved her hand. Calms Monk Ning's Dharma's Dharma assembly. Ning Chen quietly looked at her for a while, then indifferently landed on the water and walked to her side. He casually sat on a lotus leaf and nodded indifferently. Yes, I've already assigned them homework. Let them digest the content of the spiritual conference on their own. You Dharma 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 ma the Dharma Dharma play Dharma 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 Dharma. Dharma there's Dharma Dhara Dharma 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 Dhara Dhara Dharma Dharma Dhara Dharma Dharma is her T S S S S to Lu is to buy SS so. Ning Chin froze for a moment and then breathed a sigh of relief. He reached out and touched her hair as if he had accepted his fate. But he didn't go any further. The two of them snuggled up to each other in the lotus field. It was a heartwarming scene. The girl seemed a little tired. She closed her eyes lazily. Her breathing gradually became even. Her side profile was soft and beautiful. She had a slight blush. Chapter 2978. More than half of the purified power had returned to him. His body wasn't that weak. Ning Chen's fingers gently fell on her cheek, and his cold eyes finally softened a little. The skin under his fingers was delicate and tender, as smooth as a flower petal. The cinnabar between the youth's eyebrows was redder, and there was even a trace of demonic darkness. It was as if his desires couldn't be suppressed and overflowed. His fingertips trembled slightly, and he silently chanted the scripture again to suppress the desires in his body. Then, just as he was about to withdraw his hand, he stopped as if he sensed something. Once again, the aura of human essence appeared. Ning Chen frowned strangely, and he looked at the sleeping girl. Suddenly, he leaned over and sniffed her neck. Nothing. She was clean. If demons absorbed human essence, then the essence would definitely stay in the body, and this kind of aura would be emitted everywhere. But she was clean. But he did sense that kind of aura. Just as he was about to lower his head again to smell somewhere else. The girl suddenly opened her eyes, and her eyes were bright. He moved closer, and she suddenly raised her head again. The two people's lips rubbed against each other. Ning Chen was stunned for a moment before he reacted, and his face turned red. He immediately pushed her away from behind, but she had already taken the opportunity to wrap her arms around his neck, and kissed him deeply. Her soft lips were like the most fragrant wine. Even if this monk had never drunk wine before. He also felt that kind of uncontrollable, unstoppable, and even dizzy intoxication. His breath was filled with her fragrance. His heartbeat began to accelerate uncontrollably, and his skin temperature began to boil. Everything was on the verge of going out of control. He abruptly grabbed her arm and took a step back before he left her. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just woken up, and there were traces of hazy mist in her eyes, and the corners of her eyes were red as she looked at him. She slowly stretched out her fingertips and gently touched her lips, and then said with a smile, "Monk, what were you doing just now? Stealing a kiss from me?" This was simply a bogus accusation. Ning Chen couldn't explain, and suddenly moved closer to her. After all, her body was very clean, and there was that kind of faint human aura. It was more like an illusion. Wei Wei Bai lazily propped up her chin with one hand and gave him a coquettish look. "Don't hide. We're in love with each other. Let's take this opportunity to do something good." Ning Chen didn't even look at her. Instead, he stood up calmly and walked across the water. His footsteps were steady, but they caused ripples on the water surface. His footsteps seemed to have become heavier. Wei Wei Bai also jumped up and chased after him. "Monk, don't go. Come, let's do something beautiful together." Ning Chen ran even faster. Wei Wei Bai giggled as she ran over and clung onto his back. Ning Chen's footsteps were a bit messy. His tone was heavy. Let go. Wei Wei Bai hugged him like a koala bear, squinting her eyes as she said, "You're mine, so I won't let you go." With great difficulty, he finally made it back to the meditation room. Just as he was about to wave his hand to summon the bowl. However, he felt the gentle breath of the young girl on his back gently caressing his neck. Her voice was sweet. "Monk, are you attracted to me? Otherwise, why did you suddenly sneak over? Do you want to touch me?" Ning Chen paused. The girl behind him was trying hard to rub against him, but she just didn't let go of him. She whispered enchantingly, "You can do whatever you want to me. I can bear anything." Ning Chen's breath was heavy, and the cinnabar between his eyebrows was burning. His fingertips trembled slightly, and his voice was cold. "Let go." Obviously, he could push her away himself, but he could only stand there in a daze. Only his voice had some strength. Wei Wei Bai clung to him like a rascal. "What can you do if I don't let go?" It was as if she knew that he wouldn't do anything. She was so bad that she deliberately continued to cling to him, touching him up and down. Just as her hand was about to enter the unspeakable place. Suddenly, the world turned upside down, and she was pressed down on the table. Under the table, there were scriptures scattered in all directions. Her eyes were a little dazed, and she looked up at Ning Chen who was on top of her. The young man lowered his eyes to look at her. In his black eyes, there was a kind of thick darkness that made people feel uneasy. He was a little different from usual. That kind of abstinent coldness, but there was a hint of dangerous hostility. It was as if some kind of demon beast was hiding in it, ready to make a move. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.